Chapter 499. What's more, Yang Qindong had also said that as long as the Hong family members were capable, they could also be brought into the army. As long as the descendants of the Hong family worked hard and were nurtured well, this 30,000-strong army would be equivalent to the Hong family's own army. Other than a powerful mercenary group, no one else would be able to suppress him. This could also be considered as bringing glory to the Hong family. Hong Jin agreed. This was within Yang Qindong's expectations. Alright, since that's the case, Tiger's Mane will tell you what to do. From now on, you can put down whatever you're doing. Tomorrow was the 10th day. Yang Qindong had already made his preparations and was about to launch a fierce offensive. Naturally, he would have to put aside the matter of accepting the Hans for now. However, Hong Jin did not know about this. He thought that someone else would take over his job. Now that he was focused on becoming a general, he kowtowed and expressed his gratitude before leaving with Tiger's Mane. After exiting the room, Tiger's Mane walked out while speaking to Hong Jin, who had his head lowered and was one step behind him. You're quite lucky. The young master chose you because of your recent good performance. However, I hope that you can continue to work hard and don't think of other things. Yes, Tiger's Mane is right. Hong Jin will remember. Since the young master has allowed you to become a general, you can go and pick soldiers now. There are 20,000 Jiaoji citizens in Beidai City. Among them, there are around 6,000 youths. You can choose 2,000 of them to follow the mercenary army to the battlefield tomorrow. Of course, you won't be doing anything dangerous. You'll just have to clean up the battlefield, watch over the prisoners, and collect military supplies. Tiger's Mane spoke softly, but these words were like a bolt from the blue in Hong Jin's ears. His mind went blank. Tomorrow? Yes. Tiger's Mane nodded. Since he had decided to use Hong Jin, there were some things that he was not afraid of in advance. The young master and Jiaoji have been feigning civility for 9 days. All the preparations have been completed. Naturally, it's time to turn hostile. Hong Jin could no longer hear Tiger's Mane's next words. His mind was still muddled. He had always thought that the mercenaries couldn't take down the entire Jiaoji, and he didn't want to continue fighting. That was why he decided to negotiate with them. As for his position as a general, it should only be to protect Qi and Beidai cities. But now, he realized that he couldn't see through Yang Qindong at all. Naturally, he couldn't know what Yang Qindong was really thinking. Could it be that Jiaoji is really going to be destroyed? As soon as this thought appeared in his mind, Hong Jin became excited. If he only wanted to govern Qi and the northern belt before, wouldn't he be able to govern the entire Jiaoji region? If that was the case, he would have a lot of power. The excitement only lasted for a moment before Hong Jin thought of another terrifying result. His Hong family was still in Zhoushan Prefecture. Because both sides were negotiating, the Jiaoji army naturally wouldn't do anything to the Hong family. But once the war started, how could he guarantee his family's safety? Tiger's Mane, my Hong family, Hu Mang already knew what Hong Jin wanted to say, so he directly interrupted him and said, your Hong family doesn't need to worry. At this moment, the Zhoushan county should have already been captured by the mercenary navy. Your Hong family will be safe. Zhoushan Prefecture. It faced the sea from east to west, connected to Jiaoji Prefecture in the north, and connected to Rinan Prefecture in the south. It was an important transportation link in Jiaoji. Previously, Crown Prince Li Yuanlong stayed here to stabilize the situation in Jiaoji. But because Hanoi City was in danger, the old King Lily didn't care. The Crown Prince had no choice but to leave for the capital to find a solution. After the Crown Prince left, the normally tense Jiaoji officials were relieved that there was no longer a curse on their heads. Although the mercenaries had appeared in Qi City and Beidai City, they were still some distance away from them. Not to mention, they had already received orders to send all the Han people out to negotiate with the mercenaries. Since it was a peace negotiation, there was no need to worry about the safety here. Coincidentally, It was drizzling today, so the generals and soldiers guarding the coastline went into their rooms to slack off. May Island. It was near Wuji City, the source of the eastern coastline of Jiaoji. Usually, there were hundreds of Jiaoji soldiers stationed here. Once they discovered any enemy, they would immediately light the beacon on the island to provide information to the city less than 100 miles away. It was drizzling today. It had been raining since morning, and there was even a moderate drizzle in the afternoon. Under such terrible weather, the visibility on the sea was not high. The Jiaoji soldiers in charge of the lookout could only see about 20 meters ahead of them. Beyond that, all they could see was a vast expanse of whiteness. With their vision obstructed and the fact that there had been no enemy here for many years, the soldiers let down their guard. Under the drizzle, other than the 2 lookout posts on the north and south, the rest of the soldiers had gone to rest in the barracks. In this environment where not even a single bird could be seen, a small boat slowly approached Miao Island. When it was about 100 meters away from the island, it suddenly stopped. Rain and fog were everywhere, forming a very good protection, making it difficult for people to spot it. As soon as the boat came to a stop, 8 men in black tights appeared on the boat and disappeared in a flash. After a few soft splashes, the 8 men dived into the water and headed straight for Miao Island, which was 100 meters away. Just like the Wolf Fang special forces on land, they were like a sharp knife that could be stabbed into the enemy's chest at any time. In the Navy, Division Commander Gao Xiong had invested a lot of energy and resources to form an elite team that struck fear in the hearts of the enemy. They were the Marine Corps. Since its establishment, the Marine Corps had completed no less than 20 missions. Many ships traveling in this sea area wanted to quietly pass by without paying the protection fee, but in the end, the ships sank to the bottom of the sea, which was partly due to their efforts. This time, in order to complete the mission taught by the 6th young master, Commander Nia Tong had transferred a platoon of Marine Corps from Division Commander Gao Xiong. The 8 men just now were just the first batch of soldiers to enter the sea. With the first batch, there would naturally be a second batch. In the blink of an eye, another 8 men had disappeared into the sea. After a few more batches, a platoon of 30 soldiers had entered the sea. About half an hour after these people entered the sea, many large warships appeared behind the small boat. It was as if they had descended from the sky. They first appeared in the white fog, then slowly approached Miao Island. The soldiers on May Island were completely unaware of this. They did not know that their fate had already been decided at this moment. They also did not know that at the edge of the island, 30 mercenaries armed with Type 95 mercenaries had already landed on the shore and were slowly approaching them. They had already practiced infiltration and landing on the island countless times. It was just a group of 100 unprepared enemies. These elite soldiers did not even consider them a threat. If not for the fact that they were afraid of alerting the enemy and causing them to ignite the fire beacon, which would hinder their next attack on the beach, they would not have needed to infiltrate like this and would have directly attacked. Even though they were very confident in their own combat strength, when they reached the island from the sea, the 30 elite soldiers did not immediately make their move. Instead, they carefully observed the terrain. Discovering that it was the same as what they had predicted, other than the 2 Jiaoji soldiers on the lookout posts, there were no other enemies. As the platoon leader of the Marine Corps, Feng Liaoran raised his right hand and made a gesture. Following that, the 10 soldiers advanced forward like foxes. This squad of soldiers was not only responsible for dealing with the enemies on the lookout posts, they were also responsible for protecting the beacon towers that could be ignited at any time. As for Feng Liaoran, he led the remaining 2 squads of soldiers towards the only military camp on the island, which was a row of stone bungalows. Without any warning, the silencer on the 95 gun fired a bullet. The 2 Jiaoji soldiers who were still dozing off saw the King of Hell. Following the elimination of the outer sentries, Feng Liaoran and the rest began to increase their speed. However, their worries were unfounded. Even when they rushed to the entrance of the bungalow, they were still not discovered, and not a single person walked out of the bungalow. Prepare the smoke grenades. Feng Liaoran raised his right hand and ordered while holding his gun. Ever since the smoke grenades were taken out by Yang Qindong from the warehouse, they had been the research object of the Crimson City's arsenal. Finally, they had successfully replicated it a while ago. However, because too many things were involved, they were still unable to mass-produce them. However, an elite force like the Marine Corps was naturally equipped with them. Break the door and throw the grenades. With a very straightforward battle order, a Marine raised his right leg and fiercely kicked towards the camp gate. Clang! The moment the door was opened, 2 smoke grenades were successfully thrown in. Then, the door was closed. 2 platoons of Marines stared at the door, 21 muzzles were aimed at it to prevent any accidents from happening. Cough cough cough, in less than 2 breaths of time, loud coughing sounds echoed throughout the camp. Then, the camp door was pushed open, and the Jiaoji soldiers who were choking with tears in their eyes ran out. The first Jiaoji soldier who ran out did not even have time to see what was going on outside when he felt his body become light and was sent flying. Before he could regain his composure and see what was going on around him, a cold muzzle was pointed at his head. Chapter 500. The second soldier suffered the same fate, followed by the third, the fourth. It was just like a normal drill. There were only 20 Marines, and they captured all of the Jiaoji soldiers who were running around alone. From the moment they broke through the door to the end, it took less than 15 minutes, and the overall situation was decided. Maple Piaran led 2 of his team members into the barracks, but there was only a mess here. When there was not a single person in sight, the battle was declared to have ended. The swift action plan and lightning-fast surprise attack gave people the feeling that they were using a sledgehammer to kill a chicken. Even though Maple Piaran and the other soldiers had complete control of May Island, they did not show any excitement on their faces. Perhaps to them, the mission was too easy to complete, and there was no longer any sense of challenge, let alone excitement. The warship behind them sailed past May Island. When Commander Nia Yong saw Maple Piaran and the other soldiers saluting him, he immediately returned a standard military salute, and then said to the deputy commander beside him, "Leave 1 warship for platoon leader Maple, the rest of the ships move forward at full speed, the destination is No Weave City." After the order was given, the steam-powered ships that had been modified by the shipyard in Qiqian City suddenly emitted black smoke, and like an arrow released from a bow, they flew across the sea and headed straight for No Weave City, which was dozens of miles away. No Weave City. It was still drizzling, but the soldiers and civilians of Jiaoji who had long been accustomed to such terrible weather did not have much of an impact. The city gates were wide open, and people were constantly entering and exiting. All kinds of hawking sounds could be heard, and it was very lively. On the tower of No Weave City, a Jiaoji soldier was leaning against a stone pillar and taking a nap. Perhaps it was the raindrops that fell on his face, causing him to slowly open his eyes at this moment. As he reached out to wipe the raindrops off his face, his gaze swept across the distance, and then he closed his eyes to continue his nap. But just as his head was about to lower, he suddenly thought of something and opened his eyes abruptly. He then pointed at the coastline in the distance with a somewhat shocked expression, and his voice also became a little stuttered due to the fear. "Enemy, enemy, enemy, enemy attack." Following this shout, the large ship in the distance had finished docking, and more black figures were running in this direction. More and more Jiaoji soldiers saw this scene from the top of the city walls and fell into chaos. Caught off guard by the sudden appearance of the enemy along the coastline and without receiving any signal from Mi Island, the Jiaoji soldiers were completely unprepared. They didn't even have the time to close the city gates. All they could do was watch helplessly as the mercenaries in white sailor uniforms approached and entered the city. No Weave City is finished. Southern Ming Dynasty's capital, Nanjing House. The travel-worn Jiaoji diplomatic group entered the city. When the news reached the ears of Zhu Qizhen, who was having a meal with Empress Qian in the palace, a smile finally appeared on his face. Long before the Jiaoji diplomatic mission entered the southern border, the embroidered uniform guard in charge of gathering information had already found out about their objective. The Duke of Zhongdang had unexpectedly led his troops through the Langsun region. Following that, he took down Tsui and Beidai, catching the Jiaoji army by surprise. When the news spread, even Zhu Qizhen was shocked. He knew how powerful Yang Qindong was, and he had a clear understanding and evaluation of the military strength of the mercenaries. However, he still didn't expect them to be so powerful and so fast. They actually managed to kill their way into the inner region of Jiaoji. It took him a long time to calm down from the shock. Zhu Qizhen was overjoyed as he knew his chance had come. Although Yang Qindong's strength was not what he wanted to see, his current actions had indeed solved a lot of problems for him. Once the southwest Jiaoji surrendered, Shiping King Mu Bin would be free and would no longer need to defend the southwest. When that time comes, he would be able to send out his troops to attack the Min King. If that was the case, then he had seen hope in reclaiming the lost land in the southwest. The excited Zhu Qizhen suppressed the urge to order Mu Bin to send out his troops. He decided to see what the Jiaoji envoy group had to say first. Since they were here to admit defeat, he was not going to let them off the hook this time. He was going to squeeze them dry. He wouldn't forget that if the Jiaoji army hadn't helped the Min King, how could the other party have become so powerful? He also wouldn't forget that old man Li Li still wanted to marry his third princess. "What's wrong, Your Majesty? You seem to be very happy." Empress Qian noticed that Zhu Qizhen became much more excited after Chao Jixiang came over and told him about the Jiaoji diplomatic mission. As the empress, she was naturally happy for the emperor. "Ha, Empress, we can finally hold our heads high this time. Just watch. It won't be long before the matter of the southwest is resolved. Once that matter is resolved, we will work hard to govern. There will come a day when we return to the capital of the north. There can only be one great Ming, and there must be one." Seeing the emperor in such high spirits, Empress Qian was naturally overjoyed. She even ate an extra bowl of rice due to her poor appetite. The Jiaoji diplomatic mission entered the capital. As soon as they entered the relay station, they sent a letter to the Bureau of Rites, requesting an audience with Lu De, the Minister of Rites, and the Emperor of the Southern Ming dynasty. Zhu Qizhen had already issued a decree, so how could Lu De allow the other party to meet the emperor so easily? Even he didn't plan on meeting the other party immediately. Instead, he sent a right assistant minister to probe the other party's bottom line. In Nanjing, the Jiaoji diplomatic mission and the Southern Ming Bureau of Rites were still probing each other. Within Jiaoji, scouts were galloping on horseback. They were all soldiers sent by the various cities of Zhoushan County to ask for reinforcements. In the face of Nie Tong's Lengfengai army and 2 naval auxiliary divisions, they had captured one city after another. In just the first day, Wuji and Xipu cities had fallen. If there were no accidents, tomorrow at this time, the city walls would not be high, and the defenders would only have 2,000 soldiers, so Jufeng city would also be breached. Such speed made the generals of the various cities of Zhoushan County tremble in fear. They could only send people out to Haniai City to ask for reinforcements. However, even the generals who sent people out knew that distant water couldn't quench their immediate thirst. Before reinforcements arrived, they would lose their cities and their positions. This time, even if they lost, they couldn't understand why. Didn't they say they were going to negotiate? Moreover, the negotiations were going smoothly. Why did the mercenaries suddenly attack? What was going on? Jiaoji Prime Minister Wan Chunqing also didn't understand what was going on. While they were eating dinner in their temporary residence, the head of the guards suddenly came to report that there were many more mercenaries outside the residence. They had actually surrounded the residence. They surrounded us. What do they want? Wan Chunqing hurriedly put down his chopsticks and looked at the guard captain in confusion. This subordinate doesn't know. The guard captain shook his head and added, "However, those people don't seem to have any intention of charging in. They're just guarding the door and preventing our people from entering. They're only surrounding us. Could it be that there's a change in the military situation?" The Prime Minister was indeed the Prime Minister. Wan Chunqing immediately thought of a possibility. Then he exclaimed, quickly, "Go negotiate with the mercenaries outside. I want to see the Duke of Loyalty. If that doesn't work, I can also see General Hung Jin." The sudden change made Ruan Chuanqing's expression change greatly, although he still didn't know what had happened outside. Although he didn't know what was going on outside, just the fact that the residence was surrounded was enough for him to think of the worst. "Sir, this subordinate has tried, but the other party didn't pay attention to me." The guard captain first raised his head and looked at Yang Qindong with a very difficult expression. Then he lowered his head again. Plop! Ruan Chuanqing sat back down on the wooden chair. His eyes were glazed over. He knew that this time the matter was serious. The moment Prime Minister Ruan's temporary residence was surrounded was the moment the mercenaries set out. 50,000 young Han people from Jiaoji had already entered Beidai City. Along with them were 5,000 Type 81 rifles made in Qiqian City's arsenal, as well as 20 individual rocket launchers and some corresponding firearms and ammunition. This was all that the munitions factory had in stock at the moment. Although Gao Xiong had dominated the seas with the navy and obtained a lot of copper and iron, the actual production was still very low. It was different from the production lines of factories in the future. Many things still needed to be completed by manpower. This made it so that during normal times, the things produced could still be used by the army. However, once there was a war, the production and consumption could not be proportional. For this matter, Yang Qindong had ordered the arsenal to continue expanding. His footsteps of conquering the world did not want to stop because of firearms and ammunition. However, some things could not be eaten in one bite. It needed to be digested and absorbed slowly. The manufacturing of weapons was based on this principle. The 5,000 Type 81 rifles sent from the rear were only for Leng Feng and the auxiliary soldiers to use. After all, if a gun fired too many bullets, there would be problems with the rifling. Problems such as the accuracy of the gun and the jamming of bullets would follow one after another. It was necessary to have a replacement port. The lack of firearms was also the reason why Yang Qindong allowed Hong Jin to form his own mercenary army. Firstly, there would be someone to manage Jiaoji in the future. Secondly, to prevent firearms from being wasted for no reason, there would be a need for some cold weapons battles. This was the time when Hong Jin and the rest could be used. Chapter 501. However, in order to prevent a situation like this from happening in the future, they were only allowed to have 30,000 soldiers. This was a form of self-protection. With weapons and sufficient manpower, Yang Qindong did not want to wait any longer. He wanted to take down Jiaoji first. This was the first step towards achieving his life goal. If he could not even conquer a small country like Jiaoji, how could he conquer the entire world? Only one auxiliary battalion and one temporary auxiliary battalion were left in Beidai City. Not counting the companies directly under the regiment, there were a total of 20 fully staffed battalions. They set off from Beidai City towards Hanoi City. The person in charge of the vanguard was the commander of the 3rd Battalion, Kong Chuanxin. The commander of the 1st Battalion, Wu Sheng, was still fighting the black soldiers of the Jiaoji Chenheijin tribe in the Langsun region. The commander of the 2nd Battalion, Chen Bo, had led his men to take down Beidai City previously. This time, it was finally Kong Chuanxin's 3rd Battalion's turn to make a name for themselves. 9 days ago, Battalion Commander Kong received the news. He gathered 4 of his elite company commanders and trained them according to the situation in Hanoi. Now that the army was finally ready to depart, the 3rd Battalion and 2 auxiliary battalions of the 2nd Regiment of the Cold Front set off 2 hours ahead of the main force. The moment they left Beidai City, Commander Kong Chuanxin gave the order for the troops to set off at full speed. He only gave everyone 20 hours to cover the distance of nearly 200 miles. This was a forced march. The troops had to reach Hanoi City before daybreak and rest for at least 4 hours before starting the siege. Once the order was given, it had to be carried out. The requirement to cover 200 li in 20 hours did not tire the soldiers out. On the contrary, they were all excited. Even the 4 auxiliary battalions at the back of the troops had high morale. After witnessing the power of the continuous fire guns, there was not a single soldier who did not want to own a gun of their own. Thus, becoming an auxiliary battalion became the hope of many. They did not have the chance in the past. Now that the opportunity was right in front of them, everyone was fighting to be the first. It was precisely because of their strong morale that the 7 battalions of mercenaries marched at a speed that somewhat exceeded the expectations of battalion commander Kong Chuanxin. They actually ran all the way to Hanoi City. Based on this speed, it was likely that they would arrive 2 hours earlier than the original plan. This would give everyone more time to rest under the city, and they would have more confidence in taking down Hanoi City in one battle. Hanoi City. Under King Li Li's complete control, everything here was managed by the Crown Prince Li Yuanlong. When they arrived at Hanoi from Zhoushan Prefecture, Li Yuanlong was a little worried. From time to time, there would be mercenaries patrolling the waters around the Zhoushan Prefecture, so he knew better than anyone else what kind of opponent he was facing. With the current strength of the Jiaoxi kingdom, they had no chance of winning against the cannons and guns. Unless they could produce more ironware, they might be able to rely on their defense and terrain advantage to resist for a period of time. It seemed that Li Yuanlong was worried about whether he had enough time. Fortunately, he had sent out his trump card, Prime Minister Wan Chuncheng, and he did not let him down. As soon as he entered Beidai City, he stabilized the momentum of the mercenaries. With sufficient time and the diplomatic mission sent to the capital of the Southern Ming dynasty, Nanjing, once the Southern Ming Emperor issued an imperial edict, the loyal Duke of the Great Ming dynasty would have no choice but to give up. The hope of the Jiaoxi kingdom would reappear. It seemed that the situation was developing in his favor. Li Yuanlong's complexion had also improved a lot over the past few days. In addition, he did not place his hopes on anyone else. The blacksmiths in the army were working day and night to produce iron shields. Even some of the private blacksmiths in the city were temporarily recruited to help with the production of iron carriages. They had already produced 10 iron carriages that could accommodate 200 people, as well as 2,000 iron shields. With this, he could finally breathe a sigh of relief. After all, Jiaoxi had been established for more than 20 years, so it still had some war reserves. Otherwise, how would it dare to agree to the Min king's request to stir up trouble in the southern Ming Empire? Just like now, after a few days of adjustment, there were now about 80,000 soldiers in Hanoi City. With the existence of these 80,000 soldiers, Hanoi City gave outsiders the impression that it was impregnable. Nearly 300,000 citizens of Hanoi City walked out of the fog of war, and the businesses on the streets returned to normal. From afar, it was a bustling scene. However, all of this changed as the scout in front of them galloped into the city. Report. Crown Prince Li Yuanlong had just finished inspecting the military supplies and returned to his residence. He did not even have the time to sit down and drink a cup of tea before he saw the scout who was drenched in the rain. For some reason, Li Yuanlong's heart skipped a beat when he saw the scout in such a sorry state. He had a bad feeling about this. However, he did not show it. Instead, he tried his best to stabilize his body and mind. Why are you panicking? Reporting to Your Highness the Crown Prince. This morning, the gates of Beidai City suddenly opened wide. Then, thousands of mercenaries came out of the gates and headed straight for Arhanei City. After the anxious scout finished reporting, he couldn't help but gulp a mouthful of saliva. From the moment he received the news until he returned to the city, he did not stop for a moment. As a result, his body was severely dehydrated. However, he did not have the time to drink water. He only wanted to deliver the news as soon as possible so that the Crown Prince could be prepared. Even though he was mentally prepared, when he heard the scout's report, Li Yuanlong could not help but feel a wave of dizziness. The scout's figure also swayed in front of him. After a few breaths, Li Yuanlong slowly adjusted his breathing. Then, he tried his best to use a calm voice to ask, "You said that there were thousands of people coming out of the city. How many are there?" "Around 3,000. The scout thought for a moment before replying cautiously. Anyone who could become a scout was not only agile, but more importantly, had extraordinary eyesight. Otherwise, erroneous military intelligence could lead to extremely serious consequences. Even though he only saw the mercenaries coming out of the city, he was still able to estimate the enemy's actual military strength. When he heard that there were only 3,000 people, Li Yuanlong's originally panicked emotions became much more stable. If it was just these people, it might not mean that the mercenaries were really going to war with the Jiaoji kingdom. Perhaps there were other reasons. After all, no matter how powerful the enemy was, it was too much to expect 3,000 people to take down the capital of Jiaoji, which had 80,000 soldiers and 300,000 citizens. Alright, this crown prince understands. Men, send him away to rest. Li Yuanlong's mind instantly flashed with countless possibilities. When he saw that the scout had left, he said to another guard beside him, "Immediately go and find General Fan and General Ruan." In less than an hour, the famous general of the Jiaoji kingdom, Fan Yuhai, General Ruan Gengwang, Huang Hua, Li Shaozhong, and the others hurriedly arrived at the crown prince's residence. Even though they didn't know what had happened, the crown prince's sudden summons meant that something big must have happened. When the generals arrived at the main hall of the crown prince's residence, Crown Prince Li Yuanlong walked into the hall under the protection of a few guards. "Greetings, Your Highness the Crown Prince." The generals bowed. "Generals, there's no need to be so courteous." Li Yuanlong sat down on a large chair and swept his gaze across the generals. Then, he said in a low voice, "I just received a report from a scout that 3,000 mercenaries suddenly came out of Beidai City. They are heading straight for our Hanoi city. Perhaps they will appear at the city's gates tomorrow." "What?" When the generals heard this, their expressions changed. It was obvious that they were shocked by this sudden news. However, this change in expression didn't show fear. Instead, it revealed a hint of excitement. As for the mercenaries, Wang Gengwang and Huang Hua were the only two generals who had fought with them. Moreover, Wang Gengwang had fought with the mercenaries in the rainforest of Mount Liang. From the beginning to the end, he hadn't seen the mercenaries. Even though his losses weren't small, he didn't have any direct knowledge of them. On the contrary, ever since he returned to Hanoi City, he had been thinking about blood. However, because the Crown Prince's policy was to delay the negotiations, there was no room for him to display his skills. Now that he finally had a chance to fight, how could he not be excited? Wang Gengwang wasn't the only one who thought this way. Other than Huang Hua, all the other generals had the same thought. The Crown Prince's words were very clear. This time, there were only 3,000 mercenaries. 3,000 people, how big of a storm could they cause? If the other party had only sent 30,000 people, it might be scary. However, with the difference in numbers, how could they show the slightest bit of fear? Crown Prince Li Yuanlong was also paying attention to the reactions of the generals. He was very satisfied with the answer. Other than Huang Hua and Fan Yuhai who were frowning, the other generals had an eager expression. They couldn't wait to lead their troops into battle. Huang Hua's performance was within Li Yuanlong's expectations. This person had once led 5,000 mercenaries to attack Beidai City. The result was a crushing defeat. With such a shadow in his heart, it was normal for him to have no confidence when facing the mercenaries. However, Fan Yuhai was also frowning. What did this mean? At this moment, Li Yuanlong couldn't figure it out. Chapter 502. General Fan, what do you think of the current situation? Li Yuanlong called out his name. In fact, Fan Yuhai, who could be called a famous general, had some weight in the eyes of both Li Yuanlong and Li Yuanlong. Fan Yuhai, who was called out, first bowed and then raised his eyebrows. "Your Highness. Previously, we were negotiating with the mercenaries, and we even sent a lot of Han people over. Logically speaking, we should be cooperating happily, but why would they suddenly send troops over? What is the reason? Or did something happen that we don't know about? In my opinion, before things are clear, it's better not to use weapons." Fan Yuhai's words could be said to be an experienced strategist. The art of war said to subdue the enemy's soldiers without fighting, the best of the best. Above all, the best strategy was to attack the enemy. Below that was to attack the enemy. Below that was to attack the enemy. In other words, it was best not to use weapons if possible. Especially in this kind of battle where one had no confidence, one had to be extremely careful. The other generals were clearly dissatisfied with Fan Yuhai's words. The so-called generals were naturally the ones who led the troops. However, if the world was peaceful, their existence would not be so meaningful and they would inevitably be looked down upon. Therefore, a true general needed to use war to prove himself. Fan Yuhai only said that the situation was strange and needed to be investigated. If this was not to stop the soldiers, what else could it be? It would be strange if he could gain the support of the other generals. If it wasn't for the Crown Prince personally stating his stance, there would have been people criticizing Fan Yuhai and even impeaching him for being afraid of battle. This couldn't be said to be groundless. Crown Prince Li Yuanlong listened to Fan Yuhai's words seriously and then nodded in tacit agreement. That's right, General Fan's words are exactly what this Crown Prince is worried about. Before we can figure out what's going on, it's best if we don't use our weapons. Hearing that even the Crown Prince agreed with Fan Yuhai's words, Wang Gengwang and the other generals were inevitably disappointed. They originally thought that they would not have the chance to lead troops this time. Unexpectedly, Crown Prince Li Yuanlong continued, but if the mercenaries arrive tomorrow, what should we do? Are we going to let them show off and challenge us? Of course not. We don't want to go to war, but we aren't afraid of war. If the mercenaries really dare to do this, the soldiers of Jiaoji won't be afraid. We'll just go out of the city and destroy their prestige. Fan Yuhai raised his head and said with determination. Anyone who could be called a famous general would not be a coward. It wasn't that Fan Yuhai didn't want to fight, but he didn't want to fight a cowardly battle without any basis. The so-called war was nothing more than a final choice in the face of the futility of peace talks and other situations. If there were other ways, no one would choose such a path that would waste manpower and resources. However, if the mercenaries were really looking down on the Jiaoji army, there was no harm in teaching them a lesson. However, there were only 3,000 of them. In Hanoi City, which had an army of 80,000, they were nothing in the eyes of the generals. After all, Jiaoji had been established for more than 20 years. Their military strength was definitely not limited to this. Previously, he had considered the fact that Hanoi City could not afford to station too many soldiers, so he had only sent 80,000. If he really wanted to mobilize, it would not be a problem to gather another 100,000 soldiers in the entire Jiaoji prefecture. Good. Hearing Fan Yuhai's words, Li Yuanlong replied happily. This was what he wanted. No matter what the mercenaries wanted to do in Hanoi City, they could not be allowed to do as they pleased. Otherwise, it would be a provocation to him, the Crown Prince. This was something that he would not allow and was unwilling to see. Li Yuanlong, who already had a plan in mind, immediately started to arrange the troops after hearing Fan Yuhai's words. Some negotiations had to be fought. The principle of peace through fighting was applicable at all times. Compared to Kong Chuanxin, who led the 3 battalions out of the city, Yang Qindong's troops were not as hurried out of the city. The 5,000 Leng Feng, auxiliary soldiers, and temporary auxiliary soldiers naturally walked at the front of the group. Behind them were the 47,000 youths from Qiming City. After leaving behind 2,000 men in Chuyi City, 1,000 men from Beidai City were left behind to take charge of the various tasks in the city. At the end of the group was the general of Jiaoji, Hong Jin, and the 2,000 newly recruited Jiaoji mercenaries. After receiving Yang Qindong's instructions, Hong Jin used only a day to form a temporary army of 2,000 men. One had to admit that he was very efficient. If it wasn't for the fact that there were not many people of suitable age in Beidai City, he would probably have formed an even larger army. The 60,000 men group walked and stopped along the way. They were not in a hurry as they made their way from Beidai City to Hanoi City. Yang Qindong was in the middle of the group, riding on a strong white horse. In his hand was a handful of bullets that had just been transported. He had a look of deep thought on his face. These bullets were randomly selected by Tiger's Mane from the thousands of boxes of bullets that had been transported over. The moment the bullets were placed in Yang Qindong's hands, his expression became much more serious. Bullets were something that Yang Qindong had dealt with for many years in his previous life. From the moment the new recruits joined the company to the time he retired to the military supply department due to his age, the number of bullets that passed through his hands numbered in the tens of thousands. He did not even need to open his eyes to look at the shape of the bullets. He only needed to touch them to know what kind of gun it was, and what caliber it was. It was because he understood it so well that when he received the new bullets from Qiming City's factory, his heart was heavy. Even though Yang Qindong had taken out various books and finished bullets, they were still 500 years ahead of time. The various technologies were completely unable to keep up, causing the current process of manufacturing bullets to rely entirely on manual labor. This also caused the shape of the bullets to be completely different, and many of them were even unqualified. Just like the handful in Yang Qindong's hands, there were only a dozen bullets, and they were divided into several sizes. Among them, there were Type 81-7, 62mm bullets, and Type 95-5, 88mm bullets. Although these two sizes of bullets looked similar to the bullets used before, in reality, there were some differences in the shape and weight of the bullets. It was these differences that caused Yang Qindong a headache. Firearms were not a joke. Even for a sharpshooter, giving him a new gun would require time to get used to it. This was because even if the guns were mechanized, there would still be differences. Not to mention the bullets for these guns that were all made by hand. 5,000 newly shipped Type 81 rifles, 500 newly shipped Type 95 rifles, Yang Qindong had seen them all, and the differences were not small. Now that the differences in the bullets were so great, it would greatly reduce the accuracy of the bullets. This was where Yang Qindong was worried. First, the second batch of guns and bullets were slightly better. After all, they were all made by experienced blacksmiths. Although there were some differences, the problem was not too big. The accuracy on the battlefield could still reach about 70%. However, because of the increase in demand at the front, the munitions factory at the rear was constantly expanding. The new recruits were mostly inexperienced, so the specifications of the products were naturally much worse. Yesterday, at the temporary shooting range in Beatty City, Yang Qindong had tried it himself. With his strength, the bullets he shot only hit the target 60% of the time. After constant shooting correction, the hit rate finally reached more than 80%. It was easy to imagine that after equipping the normal auxiliary soldiers, they would have a 30% accuracy rate. That would already be very good. This was the case when technology was not developed. Yang Qindong also knew that some things could not be forced. He could only hope that the soldiers could quickly adapt to the new guns and bullets, and not let these things adapt to them. Yang Qindong, who was riding on the horse, suddenly opened his eyes and said to Tiger's Mane, who was also riding on the side, "Inform the army that there is no need to rush. Every morning and afternoon, set aside an hour for target practice." Target practice? Tiger's Mane's face showed a look of confusion. He wanted to say that target practice was a waste of bullets, and even the wear and tear of the guns was not small. But since it was an order from the young master, of course, he would unconditionally carry it out. He nodded, then turned around and rode off to inform the army. How could Yang Qindong not know about these disadvantages? But if the soldiers were not fully adapted to the guns and ammunition, when faced with the charge of the enemy on the battlefield, the guns in their hands would not be accurate. Once the enemy really rushed in front of them, the losses would be huge. No matter what, guns were inanimate objects. Now that they were worn out, they could kill more enemies on the battlefield, increase their accuracy, and reduce the number of casualties. No matter how one looked at it, it was worth it. Through target practice, the soldiers would be more compatible with the unique guns in their hands. This was the only thing Yang Qindong could do for the soldiers. Not long after the order was given, the army stopped, and close to 50,000 Crimson City youths started to cook. Not far away, gunshots could be heard. The target practice had begun. The deafening gunshots caused the originally disorganized Jiaoji mercenaries to change their minds. At this moment, Hung Jin's words finally carried more weight, and more people knew what it meant to obey orders. Below Hanoi City. Before midnight, the 7 battalions of mercenaries had arrived at a place 5 miles away from the city. They quickly set up tents here. Other than the 2 companies of soldiers who were in charge of guarding and keeping watch, the rest of the soldiers went to sleep after eating. Everyone knew that when dawn came, there would be a huge battle waiting for them. Chapter 503. While the soldiers were resting, Kang Chuanxin, as the battalion commander, did not go to rest. Instead, he called for his 4 company commanders and 6 auxiliary battalion commanders to gather around a bonfire for a meeting. Ever since they left Beidai City, Kang Chuanxin's excitement hadn't stopped. This was the first battle against the capital of the Jiaoji nation, Hanoi City. Now that it was handed over to him, it was enough to prove how much the 6th young master valued him. This was also the first time the mercenaries fought against an enemy's capital. It was bound to be recorded in the annals of history. As the commander of this battle, he was bound to be remembered in the history of the mercenaries. However, whether this record was good or bad would depend on tomorrow's performance. He called all the officers over for a discussion. Even though there were 7 battalion commanders, including himself, but in reality, there were still some differences in strength. For example, Kang Chuanxin's position as the commander of the Cold Vanguard Battalion had the highest authority. He was equivalent to a battalion commander of the A Battalion, an auxiliary battalion was equivalent to a B Battalion, and a temporary auxiliary battalion was equivalent to a C Battalion. Therefore, right from the start of the meeting, Kang Chuanxin held the initiative. He didn't even bother to ask the other 6 battalion commanders what they thought. Instead, he focused his attention on Tian Su, the company commander of the 3rd Battalion's 1st Company. If the 3rd Battalion of the Cold Vanguard Battalion was the main offensive company, then the commander of the 1st Company under him was the best company of the 3rd Battalion. At the very least, the destructive power and military strength of this company was far greater than that of an auxiliary battalion. Compared to the temporary auxiliary battalion, it was at least 3 to 4 times more powerful. 1st Company Commander, what do you think of being the main offensive force for tomorrow's battle? Kang Chuanxin asked directly without any pleasantries. Thank you for your trust, 1st Company will definitely complete the mission. Tian Su stood up excitedly. His face was flushed with excitement. Naturally, the other 3 company commanders of the 3rd Battalion were dissatisfied. But there was nothing they could do about it. After all, he was the company commander of the 1st Company. In the previous few small-scale competitions held in the barracks, the 1st Company had always been victorious. They were the most outstanding in all aspects, and this was also recognized by everyone. After considering the importance of tomorrow's battle, the 3 company commanders didn't say anything even though they were still a little jealous. It was a good thing to have a certain level of competition. However, if internal strife were to occur because of this, it would ultimately affect the overall combat strength of the entire 3rd Battalion. That would be a big deal. The result was very straightforward. Whoever had internal strife would be fired. Due to this reason, since the establishment of Cold Front, 4 company-level officers had been demoted because of internal strife. They had all been reported to the 6th young master for approval. The 4 company commanders, who originally had a bright future ahead of them, wanted to achieve more achievements, so they started to play tricks in the dark. Later, they were discovered by the government and reported to the 6th young master. The 4 of them were immediately removed from their positions and sent to the various factories in Crimson City for observation. If they didn't perform well, they would be sent to farm, and there would be no future for them. The 6th young master had said more than once that it was hard to find a 3-legged toad, but there were plenty of 2-legged people. Especially in the Cold Front, there were many heroes and heroines. Even without them, the Cold Front would still continue. If anyone dared to have such thoughts and wanted to challenge his bottom line, then they could try. After the incident with the 4 company commanders, the relationship between the officers had improved a lot. Normal competition still existed, and this was encouraged by the higher-ups. However, there were no longer any cases of people using unscrupulous methods to achieve victory. Perhaps there were still some who had such thoughts, but they definitely wouldn't dare to do it. When Tian Su was called out by Kong Chuanxin, his face was filled with excitement. Kong Chuanxin was also very satisfied with the morale of the other party. He nodded and said, "Good. Tomorrow morning, we will see your company's performance. The other battalions will cooperate with you. However, I will say the ugly words first. If your performance is not good, and you don't reach the standard of your usual training, then this battalion commander will have the authority to replace you at any time. When that time comes, don't come complaining to me." "Yes, I promise to complete the mission." After saying this, Tian Su scratched his head embarrassedly. Obviously, this wasn't the first time he had complained to his superiors because he couldn't get the main attack mission. Kong Chuanxin quickly decided on the main attack mission, causing the auxiliary battalion commanders and temporary battalion commanders to be extremely envious. However, they could only be envious in their hearts. After all, Leng Feng's strength was there for all to see. Leng Feng was able to hit the target with 60% to 70% of the bullets that were issued later. However, the temporary battalion commanders only had an average of 30% of the bullets. With such a huge difference, even if they weren't convinced, they had no choice but to accept it. After the main attack mission was assigned, it was time to assign the auxiliary attack missions. Regarding this, the military plan had already been formulated before they set off from Beidao City. Now, it was just a matter of repeating it. It was because of this that the pre-battle meeting was conducted in an orderly manner. Compared to the calm mercenaries outside the city, the Jiaoxi soldiers in Hanoi City were shocked by the sudden appearance of the enemy. The general on duty reported the discovery of the mercenaries to his superiors. When the news reached the ears of the crown prince, Li Yuanlong, who was in the palace, he was extremely shocked. The first thing he said was, "How can these mercenaries be so fast? Did they fall from the sky?" Li Yuanlong couldn't be blamed for this. The distance between Beidao City and Hanoi City was close to 200 li based on the speed of the Jiaoxi army. It would normally take 3 days if they were fast, 4 to 5 days if they were slow. However, in less than a day, the mercenaries had already covered the entire distance. Just this speed alone was enough to make one look at them in a new light. The generals in the city were also summoned to the main hall of the palace. After hearing the news, they were all extremely shocked. Just like the time when Huang Hua led his army to attack Beidao City, he had already tried his best. However, it still took 2.5 days for 5,000 soldiers to reach Beidao City. In comparison, wouldn't his marching speed be no different from a snail's? Fortunately, this topic was quickly forgotten. The first thing everyone did when they gathered was to think about what to do next. The original plan was to leave the city the next day and arrange the troops to prepare for battle. However, from the looks of it now, it wasn't appropriate to do so. Crown Prince Li Yuanlong turned his attention to General Wang Gengwang. After all, the first battle of the plan was to be completed by this person. Previously, Wang Gengwang's troops had contributed greatly to the battle with King Min in Nanming Kingdom. When they deployed, they only had 50,000 men. Later on, they expanded to 100,000 men. They even brought back 10,000 captives and various treasures. At that time, he was in the limelight. At that time, Wang Gengwang was also in the limelight and looked down on everyone. With the appearance of the mercenaries, the situation began to change. As a result, only 15% of his 100,000 men returned to Hanoi City. When they deployed 50,000 men, they only returned 15,000 defeated soldiers. This caused many people to question Wang Gengwang's ability. Coincidentally, Prime Minister Wan Chunqing went to Beidao City to negotiate with the Jiaoxi army. His position became even more precarious. Helplessly, he could only try his best to fight for the role of the vanguard. He hoped that he could redeem himself from the previous defeat and become a pillar among the generals again. Li Yuanlong also gave him a chance to turn over a new leaf. He used his position as crown prince to convince everyone. Not only did he not take back his original authority of 15,000 men, he gave him another 5,000 men, making 20,000 men as the vanguard. 20,000 men against 3,000 mercenaries. The ratio was 7-1. Furthermore, they were fighting on their home ground. No one saw the possibility of defeat. However, the sudden appearance of the mercenaries had caught them off guard. However, after the initial panic, Wang Gengwang already walked out of the ranks in armor. He cupped his fist and said to Li Yuanlong, "Your Highness, I am willing to lead soldiers out of the city tonight to set up defenses in preparation for tomorrow's battle." Good. Li Yuanlong was waiting for this sentence. "Thank you for your hard work, General Ruan. In a while, you can go get 1,000 iron shields to prepare for tomorrow's battle. The other generals, do your own work according to what we discussed earlier. When the sky brightens, follow me to the city tower to take a look." "Yes." All the generals bowed and replied in unison. Among them, Wang Gengwang's face was flushed red. He was faintly excited. Not long after the generals came out of the palace returned to the camp, Wang Gengwang's troops moved. 20,000 soldiers came out of the east side of the city and began to form a formation 2 miles away from the city. They made a huge commotion. This also attracted the attention of the mercenaries. The 2 company commanders in charge of security had their bayonets loaded with guns. If anything unexpected happened, they would fire their guns. Fortunately, Wang Gengwang's troops only came out of the city and did not intend to attack immediately. Perhaps he also wanted to take action at dawn. This was an opportunity to perform well in front of the crown prince and the civil and military officials. If they attacked the camp now, even if they won, how many people would be able to see their majestic and heroic appearance? Fortunately, Wang Gengwang did not send troops out at night. Otherwise, they, who were not good at night battles, would lose even more miserably. Of course, General Ruan did not understand this point yet. Everything would have to wait until dawn. After the results of the battle were out, he would know what it meant to strike a stone with an egg. Following this, even though the distance between the 2 armies was less than 3 miles, and the enemy's barracks could be seen from afar, it was still peaceful. When dawn broke the next day, smoke rose from the camp. The cooks started to get busy. A great battle was about to take place in Jiaoji. Chapter 504. Southern Ming Capital, Nanjing Imperial Palace. The Minister of Rites, Lu De, was asked to stay behind by Zhu Qizhen after the morning assembly. Compared to a while ago, Zhu Qizhen's face was much rosier, and his mental state was much stronger. Even when he spoke to his subjects, his tone was much friendlier. "Minister Lu, how are the negotiations with the Jiaoji diplomatic mission going?" "Your Majesty, this subject is preparing to report this matter to you. Just last night, after the efforts of the officials from the Ministry of Rites, the Jiaoji diplomatic group finally agreed to submit to the Southern Ming dynasty. If needed, they can also send troops to attack the Min King's army. Your Majesty only needs to issue a decree for the Duke of Loyalty to disband the mercenaries." When talking about these, Lu De could be said to be talking non-stop, spittle flying everywhere. The so-called unity of the Ministry of Rites was actually nothing much. It was only because the Jiaoji diplomatic mission could not drag on any longer that they took the initiative to give in. However, other people didn't know about all this. Lu De could naturally put all the credit on his head and flatter himself. Oh. When Zhu Qizhen heard that Jiaoji was not only willing to submit, but also send troops to help him deal with the rebel king of Min's faction, his eyes widened. He then shouted loudly and slapped his hands on the dragon shore. It was no wonder that Zhu Qizhen was so excited. If it was a small Jiaoji in the past, he would not take it seriously. However, ever since his defeat at the Battle of Tumu, he had not had a peaceful time. He had walked step by step. To be able to persevere until now, he felt somewhat tired. After enduring for so long, he finally saw hope. How could he not be excited? How could he not be excited? Zhu Qizhen was truly happy. The king of Min was able to gain power with the help of the Jiaoji army. Why couldn't he gain their help to defeat the enemy? Once the king of Min's army was defeated, the southern Ming would take back Guangdong, Guangxi, and Yunnan. Not only that, he had also gained the friendship of Jiaoji. When the time came, he could ask them to send troops to help him deal with the Baiming king of Yu, Zhu Qiyu. It would not be impossible for him to unify the great Ming. When Zhu Qizhen thought about how he finally saw the hope of unifying the great Ming dynasty, he wanted to cry. In the past 2 years, he rarely had a good night's sleep. Most of the time, he had nightmares. Now that he could finally get rid of all of this, it was a wonderful feeling. Zhu Qizhen's cheerful appearance was seen by Lu De. On the surface, he also had a smile on his face, as if he was happy for the emperor, but in his heart, he was thinking about how to use this opportunity to deal with Yang Qindong. Putting aside the fact that he had been in conflict with Yang Qindong because of the Hangzhou prefectural magistrate, when Yang Qindong had asked for the throne, even when Zhu Qizhen had agreed to it, he had taken the initiative to step forward and come up with a plan. He had used the reason that he needed to inform the emperor of Baiming to ruin the plan. From this point alone, the conflict between the two sides was irreconcilable. A while ago, he heard that the mercenaries had actually killed their way through the Langsun region and reached the hinterland of Jiaoji. No one was more worried than him. Lu De was truly afraid that Yang Qindong was too powerful. If that was the case, he would be able to cause trouble for him at any time. Just as he was anxious and hesitant, even Lu De was thinking about whether he should send someone to contact Yang Qindong privately and take the initiative to submit to him in order to ensure his safety in the future. The Jiaoji diplomatic group appeared at the right time. After forgiving them for 2 or 3 days, they completely submitted to him. This gave Lu De hope that the matter could be resolved. Now that he saw how happy Zhu Qizhen was, he rolled his eyes and cupped his fists. Your Majesty, Jiaoji is willing to submit to you and is willing to help your Majesty send troops to quell the rebellion. However, there is a prerequisite for all of this. That is, the Duke of Loyalty has to disband the mercenaries. However, there is a saying since ancient times that when a general is away, military orders cannot be given. Will he agree? After hearing this, Zhu Qizhen's eyes flashed with anger. He was the current emperor. His words were the imperial edict. If anyone disobeyed, it would be considered as disobeying the imperial edict. Who would dare to disobey the imperial edict? Of course, this anger was only a flash. Even Zhu Qizhen himself knew that his so-called authority as the emperor was naturally an extraordinary existence in the eyes of other officials, but it might not really have any effect on Yang Qindong. Didn't he previously order the Duke of Loyalty, who had resolved the rebellion in Guangdong, to disband the mercenaries and return to the capital? However, the other party still didn't agree. Not to mention, Jiaoji, which was thousands of li away, had the qualifications to disobey the imperial edict. If Yang Qindong disobeyed his imperial edict, wouldn't his reputation as the emperor be tarnished if word got out? If that really happened, Jiaoji wouldn't seek him out even if they had to admit defeat. The favorable situation would be lost in an instant. Zhu Qizhen felt a headache coming on. But no matter what, he was still an emperor. Even if Zhu Qizhen didn't have the confidence, he couldn't show weakness in front of an official. So he only said ambiguously, "Beloved official Lu is right. The Duke of Zhongdan is currently fighting a bloody battle in Jiaoji. We also don't know what the situation is like there. If the imperial edict delayed something important, wouldn't it be our fault?" He wasn't confident at all. However, he made it sound so dignified. Otherwise, how could he be the emperor? The word official could be said in any way. Although he understood this, Lu De definitely wouldn't expose him. This was a slap to the emperor's face. Unless he didn't want to live anymore, he definitely wouldn't do it. Not only that, he also pretended to be very understanding. Your Majesty is wise. The Duke of Loyalty's situation isn't something we can know about immediately. Perhaps he's facing some difficulties. Seeing Lu De on the right track, Zhu Qizhen was naturally very happy. He hurriedly nodded and said, "Yes, yes. Beloved official Lu is still the one who understands us." "That's right. Does the Jiaoji diplomatic corps have any other explanation?" Clearly, Zhu Qizhen was trying to think of another way by asking this question. After all, he couldn't guarantee that the imperial edict would be able to persuade Yang Qindong. He wanted to think of a solution from the weakened Jiaoji diplomatic corps. This. Lu De understood Zhu Qizhen's intentions and had a troubled expression. "I'm afraid that won't work. If the Duke of Loyalty doesn't withdraw his troops, Jiaoji can't even take care of itself. How can they help us?" "Is that so?" "That's true." Zhu Qizhen nodded and didn't say anything else. Lu De, who was standing below, was secretly discussing Zhu Qizhen's fantasy. He didn't have 100% confidence in making Yang Qindong withdraw his troops from Jiaoji. Yet, he still wanted Jiaoji to send troops to help him deal with the rebellious Min royal lineage. He wanted to take all the good things in the world. How could that be possible? Not to mention that Lu De really didn't have any way to persuade the Jiaoji army. Even if he did, he wouldn't help. He couldn't wait for Yang Qindong to be unlucky. Now that he had finally found an opportunity, how could he take the initiative to retreat? As the saying goes, one should take action when one should. Seeing Zhu Qizhen hesitate, Lu De hardened his heart and decided to add fuel to the fire. However, if he did so, the hatred between him and Yang Qindong would be irreconcilable. But unless that was the case, he would have to lower his head to Yang Qindong. For Lu De, the Minister of Rights, to lower his head to a junior was too embarrassing. That would be no different from killing him. After making the decision to offend Yang Qindong to the end, Lu De saw Zhu Qizhen's silence and spoke again. "Your Majesty, it's actually not impossible to persuade the Duke of Loyalty." Zhu Qizhen was still thinking about how to use the current situation to obtain the best advantage for himself when he suddenly heard Lu De's words. "Beloved official Lu, you say you have a way. What is it?" "Your Majesty, there is a way. However, if we do this, it will inevitably draw the displeasure of the Duke of Loyalty. However, compared to resolving the King of Min's rebellion and restoring the Southern Ming Empire's clarity, one person's honor and disgrace are nothing. In short, we will have to ask your Majesty to make a decision." Lu De didn't directly state the method. Instead, he had a troubled expression on his face. He wanted to do his best to distance himself from the matter. Zhu Qizhen didn't think so much. He only wanted to solve the problem. Thus, he looked at Lu De with an urging expression. "Beloved official Lu, if you have an idea, just say it. Whether it will work or not, we will make the decision." "Yes." Lu De hurriedly agreed and then said, "Your Majesty, from what this official knows, the Duke of Loyalty has an extremely good relationship with his fourth brother. This person is now in Fujian's Jianing Prefecture. If we can persuade this person, I think the Duke of Loyalty will have to withdraw his troops for the sake of kinship. However, in this way, it is inevitable that he will have resentment." Lu De didn't say much after that. He believed that Zhu Qizhen must have understood his hint. To put it bluntly, it was to use Yang Qindong's fourth brother as a hostage to blackmail him. Although this method was not open and aboveboard, compared to getting everything, it was worth it. Zhu Qizhen did understand Lu De's meaning, but he didn't immediately make a decision. Of course, he knew that once he did so, it was tantamount to offending Yang Qindong to death. Yang Qindong was not an outsider. If it were any other of his subjects, Zhu Qizhen would not even hesitate to issue an edict to arrest the person immediately. However, Yang Qindong now had a large number of troops in his hands. If he really pushed him to the edge and pushed him to the King of Min's side, wouldn't the loss outweigh the gain? Wouldn't he be shooting himself in the foot? If he couldn't achieve his goal after being the bad guy, then he would be asking for trouble. Chapter 505. This. Is the relationship between the Duke of Zhongdang and his fourth brother really that good? Zhu Qizhen, who couldn't make a decision immediately, asked tentatively. This subject has done my research. The Duke of Zhongdang's fourth brother, Yang Yang, is the only person who will follow the Duke of Zhongdang back to the ancestral home to pay respects. If their relationship isn't good, I'm afraid they won't go together. This subject also heard that Yang Yang was originally going to follow the Duke of Zhongdang and was allowed to. However, for some reason, he was left behind. This should be for his safety. Since this is the case, it can be used to prove that the relationship between the two brothers is really good. Is there such a thing? Zhu Qizhen sat on the high seat and stared at Lu De. If it was just a casual suggestion from Lu De, he would have thought that it was just a casual suggestion. However, now that he heard that Lu De had investigated this matter so deeply, only a fool would believe that it was all an accident. There was only one answer. Lu De had been planning for this for a long time. When he thought of the various conflicts between Lu De and Yang Qindong, Zhu Qizhen understood that Lu De wanted to use his hand to stop Yang Qindong from becoming powerful. The officials would often play some battles and schemes with each other. As the emperor, there were many things that he was well aware of. However, sometimes he would stop them or even expose them. However, sometimes he would act as if nothing had happened. Whatever decision the emperor made, it all depended on whether the goal of the struggle between the officials was beneficial to the emperor's power. Zhu Qizhen saw through Lu De's thoughts, but he didn't have the intention to expose it. He also didn't want to see Yang Qindong becoming powerful. Since Lu De's attitude and goal were the same as his, why not do it in passing? After thinking it through, Zhu Qizhen nodded, "Beloved official Lu is right. Since this is the case, this subject will send the embroidered uniform guards to Jianing Prefecture to invite that person called Yang Yang to the capital. After the matter is settled, we will issue a decree to Duke of Zhongdang. No matter what, Jiaoji is still one of the vassal states of our great Ming. It is one of the states that Taizu ordered not to invade. Even if they are willing to give up their title of Anan and return to the embrace of our great Ming, we should accept them with a benevolent heart." Zhu Qizhen finally made up his mind. Lu De breathed a sigh of relief, but at the same time, he had a new worry. After this matter was done, once the news spread, he was afraid that the other party would hate him to the bone. Unless Yang Qindong was suppressed by the Great Ming Empire in the future, once the Great Ming Empire's power rose, it might be Yang Qindong's bad luck. As for whether or not the news would spread, not long after Lu Digang walked out of the imperial palace, under Zhu Qizhen's indication, the head eunuch Chao Jixiang spread the news. As soon as Lu De returned to his residence, his subordinates told him the news that had just spread from the imperial palace, causing him to almost spit out a mouthful of blood. His expression was extremely ugly as he looked in the direction of the imperial palace. Lu De could not help but curse in his heart, "Your Majesty, even if you want to burn the bridge after crossing the river, you shouldn't be so quick to do it. It seems that in the future, if there is him, there will be no Yang Qindong. If there is Yang Qindong, there will be no him." In Nanjing City, the matter of how to deal with Jiaoji was still slowly being discussed, and the relevant matters were also slowly progressing. In front of the capital of Jiaoji, Hanoi City, arrows were already drawn and bows were drawn. A great battle was about to break out. Banners fluttered in the wind, war drums thundered, and a dark mass of soldiers stood at the foot of the city. Killing intent swept through the heavens and the earth, causing those who were brave to tremble uncontrollably. The moment the sky brightened, in front of the east gate of Hanoi City, the two armies stood in formation on the vast land. 20,000 Jiaoji soldiers dressed in plain clothes and gray armor stood in dozens of square formations. The square formations, with their banners fluttering high in the air, looked even more majestic and majestic. On the other side, 2,800 mercenaries dressed in camouflage uniforms stood in 2 rows in a long snake formation. Their advanced firearms and steel knives were all drawn, giving off a killing intent. The difference was that the mercenaries did not raise any banners. This was also Yang Qindong's idea. Before he confirmed his position, he did not plan on letting his mercenaries raise any banners. It was precisely because there were no flags flying that the nearly 3,000 mercenaries looked like a huge green snake hibernating there from afar. They seemed to be moving, yet they were still, causing others to not dare to underestimate them. Just in terms of numbers, the Jiaoji army appeared more imposing, not to mention the 20 large catapults that had been set up at the back of the formation. These catapults could throw boulders weighing almost 100 kilograms into the air. The furthest they could reach was more than 500 meters. They could be said to be the cold weapon with the longest range. Behind them were the catapults that could attack from afar. At the front of the formation was a 1,000-men iron shield formation. With these, they could block the enemy's firearms. With sufficient preparation, General Ruan Gengwang's face was filled with confidence. The war horn had been blown, but Ruan Gengwang did not immediately give the order to attack. Instead, he turned his head to look at the top of the Hanoi city wall. When he saw Crown Prince Li Yuanlong and the others standing there and looking down, he felt the blood in his body flowing quickly. He was so excited that he pulled out the sword at his waist, pointed it forward and shouted, "Advance! Advance!" The 1,000-man iron shield formation at the very front quickly changed its formation from a square to a horizontal line. Soon, it formed a huge dragon, walking at the very front of the formation. Normal shields were made of wood and iron. In the cold weapon era, they could defend against bows and arrows, but not bullets. A pure iron shield would be able to defend against long-range bullets, but it would have a lot of flaws. Even if they were raised for a short period of time, they would consume a lot of energy. Moreover, they would be inflexible and difficult to move with the army. Despite knowing these flaws and advantages, Ruan Gengwang had no choice but to rely on them. In the first place, he didn't intend to use these shields to attack. He only needed them to protect his soldiers as they continued to advance. When they reached the range where they could start charging, he didn't believe that the enemy's muskets would be able to kill many people if 20,000 of them pressed forward at once. Under Ruan Gengwang's orders, the 1,000 iron shield soldiers moved forward slowly. The other 20,000 Jiaoji soldiers hid behind them. Several square formations merged into one and moved forward slowly. Advance! 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 With every step the army took, an earth-shattering shout could be heard. It was quite impressive and gave people a sense of awe. Damn, looks like these are elite soldiers. Company Commander Tian Su, who had received the mission of being the first to attack, could not help but snort when he saw the enemy 3 miles away slowly moving towards him. Those who could become members of the Cold Vanguard were all proud. Those who could become a company commander were even more proud. It was rare for him to take anyone seriously. Now, the Jiaoji army was actually moving forward as though there was no one around them. In Tian Su's eyes, this was a form of provocation. If it were not for the fact that they were 1,000 meters away, he would have taught them a lesson with the 9-5 style. The Jiaoji army was still moving forward. The word "advance" kept coming out of their mouths. Gradually, they reached a peak. They were like a volcano that could erupt at any time. Once it reached a certain temperature, it would come rolling in. In comparison, the 7 battalions of the Cold Vanguard stood motionless on the ground. They were like huge rocks that were fixed to the ground. They were not affected by the wind and rain at all. Ha, did you see that? The enemy is afraid. Ruan Gengwang, who was riding on his horse, laughed out loud when he saw that the mercenaries were still motionless even though they had already moved 500 meters forward. In his opinion, the mercenaries were only motionless because they couldn't do anything. Crown Prince Li Yuanlong stared intently at the scene in front of him from the top of the Hanoi city tower behind him. Although the troops were already far away and he could no longer see clearly, he could still clearly see that the mercenaries were not moving. Seeing that his army was moving forward and the enemy was not moving at all, he could not help but ask the generals beside him, "Generals, what do you think the mercenaries are doing?" The one standing closest to Li Yuanlong was the famous general of Jiaoji, Fan Yuhai. Compared to the other generals who were all smiling, his expression was more serious. When he heard the crown prince's question, he replied naturally, "The enemy is clearly using inaction to counter the enemy. To be honest, this kind of steadiness is something that our army cannot achieve." Just as Fan Yuhai finished speaking, another general, Li Shaozhong, could not help but say, General Fan, why do you have to raise the morale of others and lower your own? It is obvious that the mercenaries are scared by our army and do not dare to move. Li Xiaozhong was a member of the Li clan. Now that the Li clan was powerful in Jiaoji, his status as a general had also risen. When Fan Yuhai heard Li Xiaozhong's words, he did not try to argue with him. The generals on the battlefield were not like those civil officials who cared about words. They cared more about results. Before the results were out, it was hard to tell who was right and who was wrong. Crown Prince Li Yuanlong also did not say anything. Instead, he stared at everything in front of him with interest. He wanted to see how the powerful mercenaries would deal with the Jiaoji army that outnumbered them by several times. At the front of the battlefield, the distance between the two sides was rapidly shrinking. From the initial 3 li, it was now less than 700 meters. Even so, the word advance was still echoing in the air. The Jiaoji army's momentum was getting stronger and stronger. Prepare your grenades. Shields my ass. In a moment, I will let them know what it means to lift a rock and smash it on their own feet. Facing the approaching enemy, Tianzi did not show a trace of fear. On the contrary, he gave an unquestionable military order to the soldiers below. Then, he took down the 95 style from his body and stood in a standing position, ready to shoot. Chapter 506. Battalion Commander Kong Chuanshin was in the middle of the troops. Seeing the 20,000 Jiaoji soldiers closing in, his expression did not change. If one looked closely, one could see a trace of disapproval in his eyes. It wasn't because Kong Chuanshin was careless. Before he came, Yang Qindong had talked to him and told him about the iron shield that was being built in Hanoi City. This was all thanks to the Security Bureau. After being injected with large amounts of gold and silver, the Security Bureau had developed so quickly that they had already infiltrated the countries that they were pretending to be enemies with. Once there was any movement, they would immediately spread the news so that the main force of the mercenaries could make the most accurate decision. As someone who came later, no one knew better than him the importance of intelligence. Later on, people said that victory in a war depended on the source of military intelligence. Some people even said that 70% intelligence and 30% battle. This showed the importance of military intelligence to an army. It was because he was prepared that Yang Qindong told Kong Chuanshin about the Jiaoji army building the iron chariots when Kong Chuanshin was about to lead the army into battle. Not only that, he also came up with a countermeasure. The advantage of the steel shields was their sturdiness. They could indeed effectively block flying bullets. However, their weaknesses were even more obvious. For example, they were slow and inflexible. With these shortcomings, it was naturally very easy to deal with them. All they needed to do was throw a series of grenades, and it would be like a heavenly maiden scattering flowers. In this way, unless the place was very narrow, facing the fragments of the explosion in all directions, even an iron shield would be useless. As for the steel chariots, regardless of whether it was a rocket launcher or a 4-0 flame, they would all be easy targets. Thinking about the battlefield in the future, even mobile tanks were afraid of rocket launchers, not to mention the clumsy steel chariots that relied on their legs to move. Kong Chuanshin, who had received the news ahead of time, didn't show the slightest hint of panic when he saw Iron Shield approaching him step by step. The only thing he was worried about now was whether Tianzi could keep the situation under control. After all, there was a limit to how far a grenade could be thrown. Whether or not the mercenaries at the front could withstand the pressure from the Jiaoji army and strike at the most appropriate time was the most important factor in this first battle. Tianzi was the company commander of Company 1, and was the subordinate that Battalion Commander Kong Chuanshin valued the most. As the mercenary group continued to expand, the number of mid-level officers needed also increased. Promoting new recruits was something that Yang Qindong had always advocated. Under what circumstances would one be able to tell if a person's military talent was worthy of being entrusted with important tasks? Without a doubt, war was the best battlefield and way to test a commander. Kong Chuanxin wanted to test the ability of the company commander of heavenly strategies, so he didn't say a word from beginning to end. He just watched everything from the perspective of a bystander. Of course, if heavenly policy was really useless, then the second company commander, third company commander, and fourth company commander could replace him at any time. This was also something Kong Chuanxin had prepared behind the back of the heavenly policy. He believed that even if the company commander of heavenly strategies found out about this, he wouldn't be dissatisfied. After all, the situation on the battlefield was always ever-changing. A commander who didn't leave any room for maneuver was the most unprofessional. How would the company commander of heavenly strategies know about this? After ordering a company of subordinates and a battalion of auxiliary soldiers to prepare grenades, he raised his Type 95 and fired a shot at the Jiaoji soldiers in front of him. Bah! The sound of the gunshot was extremely crisp. The bullet flew out of the barrel of the gun and hit a Jiaoji soldier's shield according to heavenly strategies plan. Under the sound of the iron weapons colliding, an even more crisp sound of collision was produced. When the gunshot rang out, Wang Gengwang's eyes widened. His expression was somewhat unnatural. Although the Crown Prince had said that these shields were made of pure metal and that firearms shouldn't be able to penetrate them, he still lacked confidence because he hadn't tested it before. When the gunshot rang out, his entire body tensed up. All of this lasted until the bullet hit the metal shield and produced a spark. Only then did he heave a huge sigh of relief. Then, he pointed to the front with a smile and said to his subordinates, "Do you see that? The opponent's firearms are useless against us." Ha ha ha. The group of subordinates also laughed loudly as if they were in agreement. Previously, they were indeed a little nervous. Although they took the initiative to attack, their morale was astonishing. However, before they encountered firearms, they really didn't have confidence in their hearts. Now, it was all good. The truth allowed them to relax. Not only the generals, but the soldiers below Yeshen were also frightened by this shot. However, when they saw that the troops in front of them didn't show any signs of chaos or uneasiness, these people also let go of their courage. When they shouted the word, "Advance," their voices were much louder and their speed was much faster. As expected, it's made of pure metal. Amazing! After firing the shot, Heavenly Strategies retracted the Type 95 and shook his head. Although he looked a little disappointed, he wasn't afraid at all. Obviously, this result was within his expectations. The two troops were still closing in on each other rapidly. 400 meters, 300 meters, 200 meters, as they got closer and closer, both troops could clearly see each other's formation. A tense atmosphere began to spread. The emotions of war and killing were quickly condensed and focused. 150 meters, 130 meters, 100 meters, at such a distance, both sides could already see each other's figures and appearances. The archers of the Jiaoji army who were hiding behind the metal shields also prepared to fire their arrows. There were a total of 2,000 archers. One could imagine that if they didn't stop them, arrows would rain down from the sky. "Comrades, charge for 30 meters. Drop the bombs and shoot." His gaze was fixed on the enemy's every move. When he saw that the enemy was about to make the first move, Heavenly Strategies, who had been lazing around all this while, seemed to have changed into a different person. He suddenly roared and led the troops to charge forward. Heavenly Strategies' actions also led the soldiers beside him to charge forward as fast as they could. The Cold Vanguard Company and the Auxiliary Battalion, a total of 500 people, charged forward like arrows released from a bow. To the soldiers who had to run 25 kilometers in a day's training, the 30-meter distance was a sprint. In just a few seconds, they had crossed the required distance. Then, 500 grenades were tossed forward like rain. Under the 30-meter standing run, the flying speed of the grenades was much further than before. Basically, each grenade was thrown a distance of more than 60 meters. Under such superposition, the distance of 100 meters was covered in the blink of an eye. Before the Jiaoji army could react, including the 2,000 archers, they had just knocked their bows. Before they could release their arrows, the grenades that filled the sky rained down on their heads. What the hell is this? Many of the Jiaoji army instinctively had this question in their minds. However, just as this thought formed in their minds, the grenades that were thrown at them had already exploded above their heads, beside them, and under their feet. Boom boom boom, the ground trembled and shrapnel flew everywhere. Flames rose and smoke lingered in the air. Following these sudden changes, the formation of the 1,000 iron shield bearers at the front of the Jiaoji army finally loosened. These iron shield bearers were originally holding heavy shields. After walking for nearly 3 miles, they were already exhausted. Suddenly, there was a loud noise and shockwave around them. It was mainly due to the various fragments attacking them. They were completely unprepared and were struck dumb in an instant. They only wanted to defend against the firearms in front of them. They did not expect such powerful explosives to suddenly explode beside them. The iron shield bearers, who seemed to have the tightest defense, were the first to collapse. The 2,000 archers who stood behind them in the second row also fell into chaos. The advantage of archers was that they could kill their enemies from a long distance. However, their disadvantage was also very obvious. Once they lost their protective barrier, their chest would be completely exposed to the enemy. There was no way to defend themselves at all. Needless to say, the explosions of the grenades were right above their heads. Who knew how many archers were killed or maimed by the power of the grenades? After a row of iron shield bearers and 2 rows of archers were defeated, the entire Jiaoji army was in chaos. Surrounded by explosions and smoke, they did not even know what to do next. The Jiaoji army was stunned and their formation was in chaos. The mercenaries didn't panic. After throwing out the grenades, they started shooting with their guns. 500 people against 20,000 enemies. There was no need for them to aim. All they needed to do was to adjust the Type 95 and Type 81 assault rifles into continuous firing mode. Da-da-da. Da-da-da-da. Bullets continued to spray out from the muzzles of the guns, shooting towards the Jiaoji soldiers opposite them. Every time the machine guns fired, a group of Jiaoji army would fall to the ground. They did not understand the situation and did not know what was going on. Many of them fell to the ground with unknown emotions. Some of the Jiaoji army soldiers who were lucky enough not to be hit by the bullets turned around and ran. When people encounter danger, they will have an instinct. This instinct is to turn around and run away. Unless there was something even more terrifying happening behind them, they would run until they could not run anymore. Chapter 507. The initial moment was terrifying. There was nothing more pitiful than a group of panicking defeated soldiers. They scrambled to retreat. They shouted and ran, and many of them fell down. The Jiaoji soldiers who were shot didn't know what they were doing. They just instinctively retreated to the open city gate behind them. General Ruan Gengwang was in the middle of the army. Riding on a horse, he could see further than ordinary people. Naturally, he knew what had happened. The sudden explosion of the grenade was beyond his expectations. He had a bad feeling when he saw a large number of Iron Shield soldiers fall to the ground. However, before he could give the order, the entire army fell into chaos. Hold on. Charge forward. They have fewer people than us. As long as we charge forward, we can win. He shouted as he swung his sword at the retreating soldiers. He wanted to use this method to stop the army from retreating. However, under the fear of death, how many people would listen to his words? How many people would listen to him? But how many people would listen to it and take it to heart? The tide of retreating soldiers couldn't be stopped. Even though Ruan Gengwang had killed 4 to 5 retreating Jiaoji soldiers, he couldn't reverse the situation. Not only that, Ruan Gengwang, who was swinging his sword, became Tian Su's target. Riding on a horse and being higher than everyone else was a privilege of a general. However, at the same time, it was inevitable that he would become a conspicuous target. Tian Su targeted him. He held the 95 style firmly with both hands and raised the gun in a half-kneeling position. He adjusted his breathing and aimed between 3 points and one line. His finger gently touched the trigger of the gun. Then, his shoulder shook. That was the recoil of the bullet. Bang! Bang! In the chaos, no one paid attention to the two gunshots. However, after the first gunshot missed the target, the second gunshot hit the target. Wang, who was still swinging his sword and yelling at the retreating soldiers, felt a pain in his chest. Then, his breathing became hurried. His body swayed a little on the horse before he lost the strength to hold on to it and fell from the horse. Once a person fell, the consequences would be very serious. Wang, who had been shot, would not have died immediately. However, when he fell to the ground, countless feet stepped on his body. Not only did he not have a single breath left, but his entire face had also changed. At that moment, he was completely trampled to death. When Wang fell off his horse and died, it meant that the 20,000 Jiaoji soldiers had completely retreated. Without anyone stopping them, the Jiaoji soldiers were running wildly. Less than 100 meters behind them, 500 mercenaries with guns were chasing after them, killing the last few Jiaoji soldiers who were running away. This seemed to have become a death sentence. The speed of the fleeing soldiers chasing after Qiu Jiaoji became slower and slower. They were all afraid that if they were too slow, they would fall behind and be killed. Because of this, stampedes occurred from time to time. No matter who it was, once they lost their balance and fell to the ground, they would not be able to escape the tragic fate of being trampled to death. Behind the Heavenly Strategies Company commander, Battalion Commander Kong Chuanxin saw that the overall situation was settled and immediately shouted to the three trumpeters who had been waiting for a long time, "Blow the bugle, everyone attack." Beep 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 beep, the loud and refreshing bugle call sounded. Over 3,000 mercenaries gave a shout and charged forward. They maintained a platoon formation and tried their best to charge forward as fast as possible. The situation in front of them seemed to be telling them that if they were late by one step, who knew how many military merits they would lose. Compared to the full charge of the mercenaries, Crown Prince Li Yuanlong staggered on the city tower of Hanoi City. If it were not for the captain of the guards who supported him, he would have fallen to the ground. Defeated, defeated. Li Yuanlong had just stabilized himself when he muttered to himself, "Defeated, defeated. Your Highness, please close the city gates immediately." General Fan Yuhai's expression was also very ugly. Fortunately, he had led troops for many years and was not as weak as the crown prince. "I agree." The other general, Huang Hua, also cupped his fist and said with his head lowered. Clearly, he could see that if this continued, the defeated Wang's troops would very likely attract the mercenaries into the city. Hearing the two generals express the same opinion, Li Yuanlong's face flashed with a hint of struggle. However, he quickly made a decision. He gritted his teeth and said, "Pass down this crown prince's order, close the city gates." With this order, it meant that the 20,000 Jiaoji soldiers outside the city had completely given up. Wang was dead and his subordinates were running like headless flies. They only hoped to enter Hanoi City as soon as possible and save their lives. However, what they saw next was the scene of the eastern city gate closing from the inside. Unpleasant creaking sounds came from the thick and heavy city gate as it rapidly closed. No! Seeing that their only escape route was about to be sealed. At least 10,000 Jiaoji soldiers' eyes turned red. Some people's eyes were filled with despair. Some people ran faster, hoping to rush into the city at the last moment. There were also people who ran towards the empty trebuchet. Then, everyone worked together to change the direction of the heavy trebuchet. Since they have already abandoned us, then don't blame us for using our own methods to fight back. A somewhat famous chiliarch yelled and ordered the soldiers under him to put the huge rocks into the trebuchet. The trebuchet began to bombard Hanoi City behind them. As he bombarded the trebuchet, the chiliarch yelled to the approaching mercenaries, "We surrender. We are willing to help you take down Hanoi City and atone for our crimes." With this yell, many Jiaoji soldiers quickly responded. In order to live, they had to show a stance. Stop firing. Company Commander Tian Su, who had already reloaded his fourth magazine, saw the change in the situation and immediately stopped the advancing mercenaries. Originally, he wanted to follow behind the Jiaoji soldiers into Hanoi City. This was also the military order he made in front of Battalion Commander Kong Chuanshin. However, when he saw the city gates close in advance, he became anxious. Although he still had a backup plan, it was still more troublesome. However, when he saw the sudden change in front of him, he suddenly had an idea. Why not use these defeated soldiers to help him take down the city? The 400 people beside him were all treasures. It would be best if he could save one of them. After making up his mind, Tian Su followed the situation and yelled, "Any Jiaoji soldiers who help the mercenaries take down the city will be atoned for their crimes and will not be killed. Anyone who still wants to resist will be killed without mercy." The 400 soldiers who were stopped by Tian Su didn't understand what he was planning. However, when they heard his yell, they all understood. In the following moment, they all followed Tian Su's lead and yelled, "Kill without mercy." Attacking was atoning for their crimes and atoning for their crimes. The Jiaoji soldiers who were already at their wits' end saw a sliver of opportunity before their deaths. How could they not grasp it with all their might? One by one, they ran to the catapults and began to help take down Hanoi City's city gate tower. These catapults were used to prevent the mercenaries from attacking. They were placed very close to Hanoi City's city gate tower, less than 50 meters away. Now that they were being used as tools to take down the city gates, one could imagine how big of a threat they were. When a random boulder was thrown, it actually flew over the city gate tower and landed in Hanoi City. Just this boulder alone was enough to harm countless innocent people in the city. Bastards, bastards! Release the arrows and kill them. Seeing these defeated soldiers helping the mercenaries against him, Crown Prince Li Yuanlong's expression turned ugly as he yelled at the top of his lungs. The Crown Prince had given the order. Although he knew that the people below were soldiers of his own country, seeing them throw boulders into the city and injure countless people, Fan Yuhai, Huang Hua, and the other generals gritted their teeth and ordered fiercely, "Fire the arrows." After a few breaths, arrows rained down. For a moment, the battle outside the city was very lively. On the contrary, Commander Tian Su and the others who were following behind became less anxious. "Commander, should we lend a hand?" A platoon leader of the Leng Feng platoon couldn't help but ask when he saw the Jiaoji soldiers fighting with their own people so fiercely. "There's no need to hurry. Let's wait until their morale is low before we make a move." Not only did Tian Su speak unhurriedly, he even sat down on the ground to take a good rest during the battle. With Commander Tian Su taking the lead, the other 500 mercenaries also sat down on the ground. Each of them hugged their guns and looked at the lively scene 200 meters away, occasionally pointing at it. By the time Battalion Commander Kong Chuanshin arrived with his main force, this was the scene that greeted him. However, Kong Chuanshin didn't have any intention of reprimanding Tian Su. Perhaps he had the same thought. Therefore, he ordered his troops to take advantage of this time to take a good rest while calling someone to call Tian Su over. "That battle just now was pretty good. You showed the might of the Leng Feng platoon. What do you plan to do next?" Kong Chuanshin asked as he pointed at the flat ground beside him, indicating that Tian Su could sit down. Of course, Kong Chuanshin knew what to do. However, he still asked because he wanted to test Tian Su. As the mercenary army continued to grow, the ranks and structure of the troops also increased. It was only a matter of time before someone like him, who had military achievements and experience, rose to the top. However, if he wanted to secure a high position, it would depend on whether he had capable subordinates. Clearly, at this moment, he was nurturing Tian Su as a trusted aide. Chapter 508. In front of Kong Chuanshin, Tian Su wasn't that restrained. After all, Kong Chuanshin was his squad leader when he first joined Leng Feng. When he became a squad leader, Kang Chuanxin was also his platoon leader. Along the way, he had a battalion commander and a company commander. Battalion commander, what I mean is that we should wait until they've exhausted most of their forces. Once they're tired, we'll blast open the east gate and take the opportunity to charge in. Tian Su said casually. This was part of the battle plan from before. During the meeting yesterday, Kang Chuanxin had said that if it was possible, they should attack Hanoi City today. If the conditions weren't right, then they would wait for the right opportunity. Although that was what he said, everyone who attended the meeting knew that the battalion commander was going to make a decision to make a great contribution. Unless the conditions were really unsuitable, the invasion of Hanoi City today was a fact that was set in stone. Aren't we being a little too hasty? Kang Chuanxin asked worriedly after hearing Tian Su's reply. According to the intelligence, there are 80,000 Jiaoxi soldiers in the city. In addition, there are many high-ranking officials and nobles in the city. I'm afraid there are at least 10,000 of them in total. If we include the conscripts in the city, then there will be 100,000 soldiers. Even though we can eliminate 20,000 of them, there will still be a lot left. Attacking a country's capital with less than 3,000 people? Moreover, the enemy had already made some preparations for defense. Such a thing sounded like a joke. However, it was a completely different story when the same thing happened to the mercenaries. With their excellent military quality, excellent physical fitness, and most importantly, excellent weapons and equipment, it was normal for them to win a battle with a small number of people. Therefore, Kang Chuanxin wasn't worried about whether they could attack the city. Instead, he was worried about whether they could gain a foothold after entering the city. If they went in first and were chased out, then it would be really embarrassing. When the sixth young master arrived with the main force of the army, wouldn't they be too ashamed to meet him? Tian Su naturally understood this as well. Therefore, he nodded in agreement. Then, he said, Battalion Commander, riches and honor are found in danger. This time, you finally have the opportunity to lead the team alone. It would be a pity if you don't fight for it. Moreover, once they suddenly entered the city, the Jiaoxi soldiers would definitely not be on guard, and the good stuff would not be transferred too much. That was a large batch of spoils of war. How much merit would that be? Presumably, the sixth young master would be very satisfied when he saw it. As for what will happen after we enter the city, we can just take it slow and steady. If it doesn't work, we can just burn down all the dangerous buildings in front of us. As long as the Jiaoxi soldiers can't get close to us, they can't do anything to us. When the time comes, it will be time for us to use our guns to kill them one by one. Burn houses? Are you going to burn down the houses too? Hearing this idea, Kang Chuanxin's eyes lit up. However, when he thought about how the sixth young master often said that he wanted to get along well with the people, he couldn't help but hesitate. Seeing Kang Chuanxin's worry, Tian Su chuckled and said, Battalion Commander, the sixth young master is a kind person. It makes sense for him to advocate for unity and building good relations with the people. However, we are not facing the Han people, but the people of Jiaoxi. Perhaps there are kind people among them, but most of them are still hostile to us. Moreover, a general success is built on 10,000 years of withered bones. At this time, we can't have the slightest bit of kindness. Otherwise, we will be harming our own brothers. Tian Su's words were very reasonable. On the battlefield, only victory mattered. Only by winning would they be able to gain the initiative. Even if you want to benefit the people, Yes Han has to have the final say. Otherwise, if you can't even protect your own life, how can you talk about protecting the interests of others? After hearing this, Kang Chuanxin finally made a decision. He wasn't an indecisive person to begin with. Otherwise, he wouldn't have become the battalion commander of Lingfeng. Alright, since that's the case, then let's rest for a while. When they are almost done fighting, we will make our move. Oh right. Prepare the weapons to break the city gate. We will see your performance later. With Kang Chuanxin's order, Tian Su changed from his seat to a standing position. He gave a standard military salute and said, rest assured, battalion commander. We will complete our mission. Crown Prince Li Yuanlong didn't know what the mercenaries were going to do next. He had already retreated from the East City Tower. After all, the catapults didn't have eyes. Who knew when they would land on his head? If he was hit, wouldn't he die with no one to seek justice? Other than Crown Prince Li Yuanlong, there was also the famous General Fan Yuhai and another general surnamed Li Xiaozhong. After they followed the Crown Prince back to the palace, they discussed what to do next. Your Highness, don't worry. Today's battle was all Ruan Gengwang's fault. He underestimated the enemy and advanced prematurely, which led to his defeat. As long as we defend the city gate, the mercenaries won't be able to gain any advantage with our advantage in numbers. Li Xiaozhong was the first to step forward. He was comforting the Crown Prince, but he was also expressing his opinion on this battle. That's right, that's right. The other generals nodded in agreement, seemingly agreeing with Li Xiaozhong's words. Who was the Crown Prince? Ruan Gengwang was the Crown Prince of a country. If nothing unexpected happened, he would be the future king. Nothing must happen to him. Even if something happened, it would be because his subordinates didn't understand the Crown Prince's intentions and didn't do a good job. If the battle was lost, someone had to be the scapegoat. Ruan Gengwang, who died on the battlefield, became the scapegoat. Although the Crown Prince Li Yuanlong couldn't bear it, he had to make this decision for the sake of the overall situation. Alright, since everyone has the same opinion, then this matter is settled. However, in order to prevent any accidents from happening, we still need to mobilize the troops. General Fan, I'll have to trouble you with this matter. Li Yuanlong nodded helplessly and handed over the battle to the famous General Fan Yuhai. This general has received the order. Fan Yuhai cupped his fists and left the hall. There was no time to lose. For the sake of Hanoi's safety, some things couldn't be delayed and had to be done immediately. After Fan Yuhai left, Li Yuanlong discussed with the generals what to do next while waiting for news of the battle at the East Gate to end. At the East Gate, after the Crown Prince left, all battle matters were handed over to General Huang Hua. General Huang wasn't in a hurry when he saw the huge rocks blocking the city. He first sent people to evacuate some of the commoners near the eastern city gate while continuously ordering the archers to shoot down arrows from the top of the city gate tower. Compared to the cumbersome catapults, the archers were much more agile. In addition, they were on high ground, so they were unstoppable. In just an hour, they killed thousands of Jiaoji soldiers. They also threw down many rocks and wooden sleepers from below the city tower, destroying 10 catapults below. Without the catapults, the Jiaoji soldiers' attack power was completely weakened. They didn't even have many bows and arrows in their hands, so they became live targets with nowhere to hide. Seeing more and more of their brothers die, some of the Jiaoji soldiers turned around and ran toward the mercenaries. When they were 300 meters away, they threw down their weapons and knelt down to surrender. Everyone had the desire to live. Seeing that there was no way out, they could only turn around and beg for mercy. Although they were uneasy and didn't know how the mercenaries would deal with them, there was still some hope for them to try. It was much better than waiting outside the city as a target. Go to a camp of temporary auxiliary soldiers and confiscate their weapons. Tie them up with ropes. Camp Commander Kong Chuanshin waved his hand and 400 temporary auxiliary soldiers rushed forward. They surrounded the Jiaoji soldiers who had already surrendered and lost their will to fight. Speaking of which, there were at least 7,000 Jiaoji soldiers who were still alive. The ratio of 400 people surrounding 7,000 people didn't seem to be harmonious. However, on the battlefield, such things happened frequently. When facing a group of defeated soldiers, especially those who had lost their will to fight, one only needed to pay a small price to detain them. It was just like when the Japanese army invaded China. 2 Japanese soldiers could detain 2,000 Chinese for tens of li. Thinking about it now, it didn't seem very possible. However, it did happen. It had to be said that when a nation lost their will to fight, it was very sad. After dealing with the 7,000 captives, Chang Tiansu also started to get busy. First, he organized the troops. Then, he called out the 10 soldiers from each platoon. Unlike the other soldiers of the Cold Front, these 10 soldiers, from the squad leader to the vice squad leader to the ordinary soldiers, each carried a large wooden box on their backs. Along the way, they had been switching to carry the boxes, and their speed was not much slower than the other comrades. When they were called out, each of them opened the wooden box skillfully. Then, 5 individual rocket launchers were assembled and placed in each of their hands. His gaze swept across the soldiers. When he saw that they were all filled with fighting spirit, Chang Tiansu nodded in satisfaction. He pointed at the east gate of Hanoi a few hundred meters away and said loudly, "Blast open that gate. Platoon 1 and 2 cover it. Platoon 3 and the auxiliary battalion will charge in when the gate is opened. Anyone who resists, kill without mercy." The order to attack the city was finally given by Chang Tiansu. A total of 500 mercenaries puffed out their chests and shouted in unison. They then turned around and began to move towards the east gate of Hanoi City in rows. On the east gate, General Huang Hua was commanding the soldiers to clean up the battlefield. Chapter 509. In the battle just now, there were still a few boulders that fell on top of the city tower, injuring some soldiers and destroying some city walls. If they weren't properly repaired, it would become a troublesome matter when facing an attack. While arranging for the city walls to be cleaned, Huang Hua ordered his men to fetch a large number of bows and arrows. They had wasted a lot of arrows from the previous battle and now was the time to replenish them. "General, look, they are moving. It seems like they are heading towards us." A soldier in charge of observing the mercenaries shouted loudly, attracting the attention of everyone, including Huang Hua. "They are really coming." Following that, a Jiaoji soldier shouted loudly. It could be heard that there was a hint of fear in this shout. Huang Hua was also awakened by the shout. When he saw that the mercenaries were indeed moving towards the east gate, his expression changed drastically. He had always thought that after the previous wave of attacks, the mercenaries would know the difficulty of attacking the city. At the very least, there would be a period of respite before the main force of the enemy arrived. However, he did not expect that they would dare to launch another attack with less than 3,000 men. Are they tired of living? Don't they know that with the city walls as cover, it is impossible for them to charge up with just 3,000 men? Many thoughts flashed through his mind in an instant. Although Huang Hua did not know what they would do, as a general, he instinctively ordered his soldiers to get into position and prepare to defend the city. He did not immediately send someone to inform the crown prince because he was still somewhat confident. With the sturdy city walls, they should be able to withstand the attacks of the mercenaries. Of course, he was more curious because he did not see any siege ladders in the enemy's hands. How were they going to attack the city? Just as this thought flashed through his mind, he suddenly thought of how Wang Gengwang was defeated. When he thought about the advanced weapons that could explode when thrown out, he felt his scalp go numb. He shouted to the Jiaoji soldiers beside him, "Archers, get ready. Don't let them get close to the city gates. Don't let them blow up the city gates. Also, send someone to inform the crown prince that we need reinforcements. The more, the better." Huang Hua's shouts caused the Jiaoji soldiers on the city walls to panic. Just when the mercenaries were 200 meters away from the city walls, the battlements were filled with archers. They knocked their arrows and prepared to shoot at the enemy at any moment. The archers were ready, but the mercenaries didn't do as they wished. They stopped when they were 130 meters away from the tower. In this position, the archers had no room to display their skills. Even if an arrow was shot, it wouldn't be able to reach that far. What are they doing? Seeing the mercenaries suddenly stop, all the Jiaoji soldiers on the tower widened their eyes. General Huang Hua, who was leading the team, had a bad premonition. However, he still couldn't figure out what the other party wanted to do. At a distance of 130 meters, Tiansu ordered the army to stop. Then, the 5 rocket launchers took another 5 steps forward. Then, 3 of them aimed at the city gate while 2 of them aimed at the city tower. It only took them a few seconds to do all this. From this point, it seemed like they had been training for a long time. They were fully prepared. The first squad leader was one of the 5 rocket launchers. Seeing that his comrades were ready, he first took a deep breath and stabilized his breathing. Then, he began the countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The moment the word 1 rang out, 5 cannonballs with flames flew out horizontally, whistling through the air and flying straight towards their respective targets. Boom, 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 boom. 5 deafening sounds rang out one after another, shocking everyone's eyes. Not only were the rocket launchers shocking, but their effects were also very shocking. The 2 rockets that were aimed at the city tower exploded in the crowd of Jiaoji soldiers. One of them was even close to General Huang Hua. The moment the explosion sounded, the powerful impact threw General Huang Hua to the ground. The 2 Jiaoji soldiers who were standing at the spot where the explosion hit were blown into pieces. There wasn't a single intact part of their bodies. They were completely obliterated. After the 3 rocket launchers that were aimed at the East City Gate exploded, the impact was even greater. They directly blew up half of the city gate, creating a 3 to 4 meter wide opening. People could easily pass through. Fire! The Tianzi company commander who was already prepared was waiting for this scene. Seeing that the rocket launchers had completed their initial target, he shouted loudly. Then, he led the troops with the Type 95 and fired at the Jiaoji archers on the city tower who were still in a daze. At a distance of 130 meters, the archers couldn't do anything to the mercenaries. However, regardless of whether it was the Type 95 or the Type 81 assault rifle, they didn't take this distance seriously. The bullets in their barrels could easily land on the city tower, dealing a heavy blow to the Jiaoji soldiers who weren't mentally prepared. Even though the bullets weren't mass-produced and lost some accuracy, at least 50% of the bullets still hit the enemy. Even if the bullets didn't hit their targets, once they hit the battlements, the impact was still frightening. It was enough to force the Jiaoji soldiers to retreat, not daring to expose themselves in the air without any cover. The 1st and 2nd platoons of Ling Feng soldiers used the Type 95 to suppress the archers on the city tower. The 3 platoons of Ling Feng and a battalion of auxiliary soldiers used this opportunity to charge towards the ruined East City Gate. First, a few grenades were tossed out nearby. Not only did they blow up the entrance of the city gate, but they also scared off the Jiaoji soldiers who wanted to reinforce the city gate. Then, the 400 mercenaries advanced triumphantly, taking advantage of this opportunity to kill their way into the city. After Tianzi's side achieved victory, Battalion Commander Kong Chuanxin led the main force and rushed over. They entered one after another, stabilizing their advantage. On the city tower, Huang Hua, who was knocked down by the rocket launchers, stood up under the protection of a few bodyguards. When he looked down at the city, he could feel the blood in his heart spurting out. It's over, it's over, it's all over. He sat on the ground with a thump. With the city gate lost, as the general of the city defense, he had an undeniable responsibility. General, the mercenaries are coming up the city ladder. Let's kill our way out. One of the bodyguards saw that the Jiaoji soldiers who wanted to escape didn't go far down the city ladder before a series of gunshots rang out. Then, they all ran back up the city tower. He guessed what had happened and suggested to Huang Hua. It's useless. We'll die if we kill our way out. Huang Hua shook his head dejectedly. He knew this crown prince too well. Wang Gengwang was the scapegoat for the previous failure. Then, he would definitely be the scapegoat for the loss of the city gate. In this way, whether they killed their way out or not, they would still die. Seeing that the general had no intention of killing his way out, the bodyguard kindly reminded him, "General, why don't we surrender?" Just now, the soldiers outside the city surrendered. They all survived. Surrender? Huang Hua shook his head and said decisively, "Our Jiaoji generals will only die standing, not kneel down to live. Come on, Take out my broadsword and fight it out with those mercenaries. If I kill one, I'll break even. If I kill two, I'll make a profit. Under Huang Hua's command, the Jiaoji soldiers on the city tower seemed to have found their backbone. Then, the 1,000 men began to charge down the city ladder in an organized manner. They shouted and yelled, creating quite a commotion. However, the city ladder wasn't wide to begin with. As long as 2 Type 95 pistols took turns to guard it and fire continuously, no one would be able to charge down the 20-meter-long spiral city ladder. After only 2 waves of attacks and over 50 people died, the other soldiers couldn't take it anymore. This was clearly the rhythm of charging down to die. There wasn't any hope of survival. Who would be willing to do it? No one was willing to charge down. This angered Huang Hua. He used his big sword to kill a Jiaoji soldier who didn't listen to his orders. Then, he coldly looked at the other Jiaoji soldiers and said, "Since you've joined the army, fighting bloody battles on the battlefield is your destiny. Whoever dares to retreat, this person will be your example." Seeing the blood dripping down from the big sword, the Jiaoji soldiers became afraid. They had no choice but to charge again. Needless to say, under the muzzle of the Type 81 rifle, they left behind a bunch of corpses and retreated. At this moment, the shouts of the mercenaries could be heard from below the city tower. Those who surrender will be spared. Those who resist will be killed without mercy. Originally, there was no hope of survival. Everyone thought that since they were going to die anyway, they might as well charge out and die. However, now that there was a path of survival in front of them, everyone's thoughts became lively. However, at this moment, Huang Hua didn't care about all this. Seeing that another charge had failed, he still ordered the other Jiaoji soldiers to continue charging. He even said that even if they were to die, they should die on the way. It had to be said that Huang Hua was a brave general. However, it was a pity that sometimes, a general's bravery wasn't enough to win a battle. Just like now, when everyone was in a dilemma, if you didn't want to encourage them and wanted to force them to die, who would listen to you? There were still a few centurions in the Jiaoji army. After they quickly exchanged glances, they brought their trusted aides and surrounded Huang Hua. "What are you guys doing?" Huang Hua's personal guards saw that the situation wasn't right. They shouted loudly, hoping to use their shouts to scare the enemy. If it was any other time, such shouts would definitely be effective. However, in the face of life and death, such shouts were clearly ineffective. The Jiaoji soldiers only hesitated for a moment before they began to surround them. Chapter 5:10. Since there were people who wanted them to die, in order to survive, they had no choice but to sacrifice themselves. Even though it seemed a little inappropriate to say these words, the truth was as such. The Jiaoji soldiers who wanted to live and surrender surrounded Huang Hua and his bodyguards. Then, someone stabbed the first sword. After a series of clashing sounds, Huang Hua died in battle. His body was thrown to the city stairs and a white flag was hung high. The fall of Jiaoji's eastern city gate tower was completely out of Crown Prince Li Yuanlong's expectations. When he heard the news in the palace, it was as if he had been struck by lightning. He stood there motionless for a long time. Crown Prince, are you all right, Your Highness?" Several young civil and military officials walked up to Li Yuanlong with anxious and concerned expressions on their faces. There were also some older ministers who shook their heads and quickly ran towards the depths of the palace. Crown Prince Li Yuanlong, who was shaken, finally recovered after a few breaths. The first thing he said was, fight back. We must take back the East Gate Tower and chase those mercenaries out of Hanoi City." "Crown Prince, don't worry. Someone is already doing that. Not only that, we are also preparing to send the 10 iron carriages that we just built." General Li Shaozhong comforted him. He was also preparing to go to the front lines to see if they could take back the East Gate. Good. Hearing Li Shaozhong's arrangement, Li Yuanlong's expression became much better. His nervous mood seemed to have been relieved. Just as he was thinking about what to do next, footsteps suddenly came from the depths of the palace behind him. Then, a male duck's voice sounded, "The king has arrived." "Greetings, your majesty." All the officials, including Crown Prince Li Yuanlong, immediately knelt on the ground. "Humph." What answered them was a cold and unhappy voice. Then, King Li was helped to sit on the golden chair in the palace hall. Li was indeed very old. In history, he should have been dead by now. But because of Yang Qindong's arrival, he was still alive. Apart from looking a little older, he was still in good spirits. At least, his face was glowing, much better than those officials who had been affected by the chaos and whose faces had turned pale. Sitting on the golden throne, Li's gaze was like a tiger king inspecting his territory. First, he looked around. Many officials and generals who were stared at by him couldn't help but lower their heads. Seemingly satisfied with the result, Li looked at Li Yuanlong again and shook his head. "Crown Prince, why do you only want to fight them head-on? Could it be that you think that the other party would retreat after killing their way through the city gates? You've really disappointed father. This child is slow-witted. Father, please enlighten me." Li Yuanlong really didn't know what to say. The situation was messed up by him, and he indeed had an unavoidable responsibility. This was a heavy blow to his prestige as the crown prince. In the past, because Li Yuanlong was calm and generous, he had united many important officials and generals. Sometimes, King Li had to worry about his feelings when giving orders. There were even some who said in private that the king was getting old and should consider abdicating the throne. The Jiaoxi kingdom only had a young king to lead it to glory. These voices were the loudest in Jiuzhen prefecture, where the crown prince was. After all, the crown prince was there. Some local officials thought that the king was far away, and very few people cared about the old King Li. If this continued, it would not be good for the Jiaoxi kingdom. It was even possible that there would be an all-out war. King Li had his own information network, so he naturally knew a lot about this. He didn't want to give up the throne while he was still alive, nor did he want to see father and son turn against each other. In order to divert everyone's attention, the King of Min's envoy arrived, and he agreed to send troops to the South Ming Kingdom. However, he didn't think that the King of Min would be so snobbish and throw them aside as soon as he gained power. As for the Southern Ming Empire, all he wanted was a marriage alliance with a princess to express his goodwill. At the same time, he wanted to strengthen his authority in the Jiaoxi Empire. To think that the mercenaries would come all the way here and create such a chaotic situation. If the crown prince could do it, it would be because the king had a good eye for talent. If it didn't work, it would be because he had suppressed the crown prince's arrogance. Thus, Li had been watching coldly from the sidelines and didn't have any intention of making a move. Now that a hole had been opened in the capital, it was time for him to take charge of the situation and turn the tide. As soon as he appeared, he first reprimanded Li Yuanlong, strongly suppressing the crown prince's arrogance. When this hand was shown, those who originally wanted to flatter the crown prince's smelly feet had to think deeply. The old king was still alive, should they restrain themselves? Just as some officials were considering their stance, King Li's voice sounded again. However, there was a sense of desolation in his voice. "Since they have already entered the city, we should leave. Pass down the order, the East Gate will continue to resist, but it doesn't need to be too intense. We just need to delay their advance. As for the others, withdraw from Haniai City and head to Shiyu City. General Fan Yuhai is already waiting for us there with a large group of warriors." "What?" As soon as the voice fell, everyone looked up with a puzzled expression. Although it was true that the mercenaries had taken down the East Gate, for the Jiaoxi Kingdom's capital, Haniai City, they still had the power to resist. In many people's eyes, if they were willing to pay a large price, it was not impossible to counterattack and take back the city gate. But why did they have to withdraw? What they didn't expect was that the king seemed to have known that things would develop like this and actually arranged a large number of soldiers in Shiyu City. They were still wondering why they couldn't see Fan Yuhai just now. It turned out that he had another important task. Many people couldn't figure it out and their eyes fell on the Crown Prince Li Yuanlong, who was also kneeling on the ground. Obviously, they wanted the Crown Prince to stand up and question the king. Being looked at by so many expectant eyes, Li Yuanlong really wanted to stand up and say something. While he was thinking about what to say, King Li on the golden throne spoke first. "That's right, I just received news that most of the Zhoushan County has been captured by the mercenaries. I'm afraid that the southern Sun County will be in danger." Plop. This was the sound of the Crown Prince wanting to stand up, but before he could do so, he fell to the ground. The Zhoushan County is the Crown Prince's headquarters and foundation. In the past few years, he had properly arranged all the officials there. It can be said that his orders there were far more effective than his father's. This was also what Li Yuanlong relied on. He just wanted to say that he would arrange for the Zhoushan County to send troops to save Haniai City. But now, the East Gate has been captured. This result was like a bolt from the blue that hit him so hard that he fell to the ground. At this moment, the only essence in his body seemed to have been sucked dry. The Crown Prince's performance fell into the eyes of some people. They quickly made a choice, and that was to continue supporting King Li. "Look, the older the ginger, the spicier it is." With just a few words, the Crown Prince's reputation fell to the lowest point. It seems that he won't be able to recover in a few years. Even the Crown Prince didn't oppose it, so how could the other officials dare to question it? Besides, since the Zhoushan County has been captured, it means that the mercenaries are serious. If this is the case, then Haniai City really can't be protected. It's better to take a step back and retreat to Shiyu City. Some people even think that even if they retreat to Shiyu City, it might not be the end. Fortunately, the king also said that General Fan Yuhai, who was supposed to deploy troops under the Crown Prince's orders, had already gone to Shiyu City. Moreover, he had already gathered a lot of troops there under the king's orders. This made some people feel more at ease. With the appearance of the king, the officials who didn't know what to do quickly went to make arrangements. After all, their family business was in Haniai City. Now that they suddenly wanted to leave, it would be very troublesome to pack up. It would take at least 3 to 5 days. King Li seemed to have noticed this problem. He waved his hand and said, "Remember, you only have 2 days. From now on, some things will be transported to Shiyu City. After 2 days, if anyone is still in the city, they will have to face the ferocious mercenaries alone." 2 days, in the hands of the great Ming's Baiming and Southern Ming officials, there was definitely not enough time. Over the years, they had bought too many things, so naturally, there were many things that needed to be taken care of. However, Jiaoji was only a small country. Whether it was the economy or agriculture, it wasn't very developed. Even if the officials wanted to fish, there was a limit to what they could get. If they used the 2 days, they would be able to take care of most of it. King Li gave the order to retreat. At the East Gate, Battalion Commander Kong Chuanshin was completely unaware of this. He was currently organizing people to guard the gate tower. Before the battle, Kong Chuanshin had discussed with his subordinates. It wasn't a big problem to take down Haniai City's East Gate by surprise. The key was whether or not they could defend it. After all, there were tens of thousands of Jiaoji soldiers in the city. Moreover, as long as they were organized properly, the Jiaoji citizens in the city could quickly form an army. If they really attacked like a wave, they would eventually run out of bullets. It was hard to say whether or not the 3,000 mercenaries would be able to defend the East Gate. Chapter 5:11. In fact, the number of mercenaries was far less than 3,000. After leaving a temporary auxiliary battalion and a cold vanguard company outside the city to take care of the 7,000 Jiaoji soldiers, the number of mercenaries at the East Gate Tower was only about 2,300. They were not fighting on their home ground, and they were at a disadvantage in terms of numbers. Kong Chuanshin did not have the confidence to win. Logically speaking, he should have sent someone to report to Yang Qindong and request for the main force to arrive quickly. That way, he would be able to put down the heavy burden on his shoulders. However, he did not do so. At least, from his point of view, the situation had not reached that critical point yet. Kong Chuanxin, who was already prepared, had even prepared a lot of bows and arrows so that he could save some bullets at the critical moment to prepare for a counterattack. However, what he saw was completely different from what he expected. The Jiaoji soldiers had no intention of charging forward. They were only a few hundred meters away from the East Gate Tower, staring at him. It was as if they would not move if he did not move. What are they doing? Kong Chuanxin felt that he could not see through the current situation. He ordered his scouts to look around to see if the other party had any tricks up their sleeves. At the same time, he sent someone to contact the agents of the Security Bureau in Hanoi City. He needed more information about the city. The scouts were sent out. They used telescopes to look around. However, the results were confusing. Not only did they not see any signs of Jiaoji soldiers moving around, they also saw many carriages coming out of the West Gate. Soon, the agents of the Security Bureau contacted them. The agents brought more accurate information. The Jiaoji soldiers had started to retreat. It seemed like they had no intention of fighting in Hanoi City. What are they doing? Even though Kong Chuanxin's mind was very open, he still could not understand the situation after receiving this report. Battalion Commander, let's report this to the 6th Young Master. Company Commander Tyance also could not understand the reason behind this. However, he knew that there was one person who could figure it out. That person was Yang Qindong. Okay. Kong Chuanxin nodded. After all, the development of the situation was somewhat beyond his expectations. Since there was such a big change, of course, he had to report this matter to the 6th Young Master. Next, whether to fight or stop, all they had to do was listen to orders. Just like that, the scouts rode out from the East Gate and headed straight for the main force of the mercenaries that were rushing over from the north. Under the leadership of Yang Qindong, the main force of the mercenaries advanced slowly while practicing their marksmanship. On one hand, he wanted to see if Kong Chuanxin's 3rd Battalion had the ability to fight alone and take down Hanoi City. On the other hand, this batch of bullets was requested in a hurry, so there was a slight discrepancy in the specifications, which directly reduced the accuracy. He wanted to request the Crimson City Munitions Factory to ensure both efficiency and quality. After that, he could only increase the number of target practice sessions to make up for the hit rate. Fortunately, after nearly 3 days of training, after each soldier had fired at least 100 bullets, the rate of hitting the target had significantly increased. Only then could he relax a little. It was also at this time that the scouts sent by Kong Chuanxin arrived. In reality, they were only 40 miles away from Hanoi City. The sudden arrival of the scouts inevitably caused Yang Qindong to have many guesses. He believed that the scouts were most likely here to ask for help, so he immediately met with the scouts and learned about what happened in Hanoi City. The Jiaoji soldiers are retreating out of the city. Is this news accurate? After listening to the scouts' report, Yang Qindong also showed a puzzled expression. It was just that he hit it very well and no one else noticed. Replying to the 6th Young Master's question, this matter has been confirmed by the scouts of the 3rd Battalion and the agents of the Security Bureau stationed in Hanoi City. Moreover, our commander also said that after taking over the east side of the city, other than the first wave of fierce counterattacks from the Jiaoji army, there were no more big battles to fight. The scout was smart enough not to give a yes or no answer. He only reported what he knew. Okay, I understand. You can go and rest for a while. Yang Qindong nodded. With the above evidence, the Jiaoji army was really going to retreat. He couldn't help but sigh. As the commander of the Jiaoji army, this kind of courage was truly admirable. Yang Qindong had already made preparations to fight with the main forces of the Jiaoji army in Hanoi City. At that time, with the powerful weapons in his hands, he could guarantee that the Jiaoji army would be completely defeated. If that happened, the outcome of the battle in Jiaoji would be decided. However, from the looks of it, things weren't that simple. Although he still didn't understand why the Jiaoji army would give up on their capital, if he didn't take advantage of such a good opportunity, it would be a waste. Tiger's man immediately passed down the order. The army is to move out at full speed and rush to Hanoi City. Since there was a good opportunity to chase after the enemy, Yang Qindong naturally wouldn't let it go. He immediately made the decision. After the order was given, the mercenary army, which had been moving slowly, suddenly moved forward at a rapid pace. The army of close to 60,000 men was like a long snake, heading straight for Hanoi City, the capital of Jiaoji. It was only a distance of 40 li, and in less than 8 hours, the 60,000 men had all arrived. Outside the city, 3rd Battalion Commander Kong Chuanshin was leading a group of officers to welcome Yang Qindong's arrival. When they saw Yang Qindong approaching on horseback, Kong Chuanshin and the rest maintained their upright posture and gave a standard military salute. Yang Qindong dismounted from his horse, returned the salute, and shook hands with Kong Chuanshin and the rest. Then, he said with an extremely confident tone, "All of you have worked hard. After this, I will definitely reward you based on your contributions. Now, let's talk about the situation in the city." When he heard that they would be rewarded based on their contributions, Kong Chuanshin's mouth widened into a smile. "Thank you for your affirmation, 6th young master. The situation in the city is already very clear. The Jiaoji army is indeed retreating. The information from the agents of the Security Bureau is that the Crown Prince, Li Yuanlong, is no longer in charge of the Jiaoji nation. Instead, the old king, Li Li, is in charge. Retreating from Jiaoji to Shiyu City was also the old king's decision." "Oh. Li Li's decision?" Yang Qindong nodded his head. If that was the case, then everything made sense. Who was Li Li? He was someone who dared to go against the great Ming dynasty at its peak. Not only were his methods sharp and vicious, but he also had an extraordinary view of the big picture. This kind of person would often make some risky decisions. However, behind such military actions, there were often unspeakable secrets. Along the way, Yang Qindong finally understood the purpose of the Jiaoji army's actions. He had to admit that this was indeed a brilliant move to take the initiative. Unfortunately, this move was still too weak to deal with the mercenaries and himself. Kong Chuanshin still didn't understand the purpose of Li Li's actions. When he saw that Yang Qindong was deep in thought, he couldn't help but ask anxiously, "6th young master, why do you think the Jiaoji army is doing this?" "Why?" "Of course it's because they don't want to be led by the nose. They want to jump outside and attack us." Yang Qindong chuckled with a confident expression. "Jump outside and attack us?" Kong Chuanshin still didn't understand. It wasn't just him. Even the 2nd Regiment commander, Luo Pe, and 2nd Battalion commander, Chen Bo, who were following behind Yang Qindong were also confused. "Bring me the map." Yang Qindong knew that if he didn't explain the situation clearly to his subordinates, they wouldn't be confident when the battle started. He waved his hand and asked Tiger's Mane to bring over the hand-drawn map of Jiaoji. A few of the officers grabbed a corner of the map and spread it open. Then, Yang Qindong pointed at the Jiaoji capital, Hanoi City, and said, "We are here now. Shiyu City is slightly northwest of Hanoi, less than 200 li away. Compared to Hanoi City, which is the capital, Shiyu City is where we have to pass to head to the west and north. If we don't deal with this, we won't be able to head in either direction with ease. Otherwise, we will face the danger of having our supplies and provisions cut off." After hearing this, Luo Pe and the rest nodded their heads. Obviously, they agreed with Yang Qindong's judgment and analysis. Yang Qindong then pointed at the map and said, "Hanoi City is the capital of Jiaoji, but at the same time, the environment here is very complicated. It's not like Chuyi City and Beidai City. There are many cities and roads that lead to Hanoi City. In other words, if we occupy this place, we will be attacked from all directions at any time. Although I don't know what that old man Li Li is thinking, I'm sure he will try to encircle us. With our limited manpower, we need to defend against enemies from all directions. On top of that, we have to deal with the mess in Hanoi City. It's not going to be easy. As he gestured for Tiger's Mane to keep the map, Yang Qindong looked at Luo Pe and the rest and asked, "How about it? If you have any thoughts or opinions, feel free to voice them out." Facing Yang Qindong's encouraging gaze, Luo Pe only hesitated for a moment before voicing his worries. Reporting to 6th Young Master, the encirclement won't be a threat to us for the time being. We will talk about it after the enemy has settled down. However, the internal strife in Hanoi City must be resolved. In order to solve the problem of chaos, we must first solve the problem of food. Food has become the most important thing. Chapter 5:12. Ha, not bad. Yang Qindong was very happy to see Luo Pe hit the nail on the head. He really hoped that his officers could grow quickly and become independent. Otherwise, conquering the world was a huge undertaking, and it was impossible to rely on a few limited people. Commander Luo is right. Since that is the case, what are we waiting for? 6th Young Master, the 2nd Battalion requests for battle. Battalion Commander Chen Bo, who was eager to give it a try, was the first to speak when he saw the opportunity. The 3rd Battalion Commander, Kong Chuanshin, was still contemplating the pros and cons of this plan when Chen Bo suddenly spoke up to snatch the right to lead the attack. He immediately said in dissatisfaction, "Battalion Commander Chen, Hanoi City was conquered by our 3rd Battalion first. The task of entering the city and snatching the rations should naturally be done by our 3rd Battalion, isn't that right, Regiment Commander?" Seeing that both of his battalion commanders were requesting to join the battle, Luo Pe smiled at Political Commissar Kong Jie. Then, he looked at Yang Qindong without blinking. As a commander, he couldn't favor one and discriminate against the other. Of course, it was best to let the 6th Young Master handle this. Yang Qindong knew that the food was important now, and it wasn't the time to argue. He immediately said, "All right, 3rd Battalion has taken down Hanoi's East City Tower. They are very tired. The task of stealing food will be handed over to 2nd Battalion. But I'll say the ugly words first. If you can't control the granary, then you should obediently withdraw and let 3rd Battalion take over. Oh right, when we attack later, we can let Hong Jin's Jiaoji mercenaries take the lead. Next would be a city battle, also known as a street battle. It was naturally much more dangerous than fighting in the open field. Of course, such a dangerous task would be left to Hong Jin's Jiaoji mercenaries. 6th Young Master, please don't worry. 2nd Battalion will complete the task." Chen Bo saluted and went to prepare. After gathering the 2 battalions and the 2 auxiliary battalions, as well as the 4 temporary auxiliary battalions, the battalion commanders of the Cold Front Battalion could mobilize far more soldiers than a regiment. He also arranged for someone to call Hong Jin over. At this time, Hong Jin was happily busy. Ever since Yang Qindong had given him permission to build a 30,000-strong army, he had put all his energy into this matter. When they had just set off from Beatty City, they had already gathered a team of 2,000 people. Originally, he thought that it would take a lot of time for the team to grow. Unexpectedly, an opportunity presented itself when they arrived at Hanoi City. In front of him were the 6,000 Jiaoji soldiers who had been captured. Originally, there were 7,000 men, but after Kong Chuanshin's 3rd Battalion took away 1,000 strong men, there were only 6,000 left. Hong Jin was overjoyed at the sudden appearance of 6,000 soldiers. He immediately sent people to work on these people. There was no lack of methods to scare them. If they did not join the ranks of the Jiaoji mercenaries, they would be sent to reform through labor and work as laborers for the rest of their lives. Being able to eat rations as a soldier was naturally better than being a coolie. Soon, his army expanded from 2,000 to 8,000. Hong Jin had also become a powerful general. Even so, Hong Jin did not have any pride in his heart. He knew that compared to a real mercenary army, he was still an outsider. Especially in front of the most elite Ling Feng, he and his 8,000 men were nothing more than a motley crew. If they really fought, they had no chance of winning. With such feelings, he was called to the 2nd Battalion Commander Chen Bo. General Hong, the opportunity to make a contribution has come. The 6th young master said that you and I should work together to kill our way into Hanoi City and take control of the places where the rations are stored. Oh right, you should be very familiar with the geography of the city. Hearing that there was a battle to fight, Hong Jin became very excited. Although he knew that using him now was mostly to be used as a shield, and that there would be a lot of casualties, it was better to be useful than useless. At that moment, he imitated the mercenaries and stood at attention. He saluted and said, "Don't worry, Battalion Commander Chen. I am very familiar with the situation in Hanoi City. I also know where the rations are stored. I even know where the rations are stored. You only need to bring your men and follow behind me." Chen Bo was very happy that Hong Jin was so considerate. "Very good. Then I will rely on you, General Hong. When this is done, I will definitely ask the 6th young master to reward you. Thank you for your guidance, Battalion Commander Chen." Hong Jin was waiting for this sentence. After saying this, he chuckled. With Hong Jin's guarantee and lead, the 8,000 Jiaoji mercenaries tied a white towel on their right arm. After that, the army quickly entered Hanoi City from the East City Gate. Behind them were 7 battalions, with the 2nd Battalion of Ling Feng as the main force. There were close to 3,000 soldiers in total. A total of 11,000 people suddenly appeared and launched a fierce attack on Hanoi City. The originally balanced situation instantly went out of control. It was true that the mercenaries had taken down the East City Gate Tower, but due to the lack of manpower, they were still in a defensive state. This caused the Jiaoji soldiers to slowly let down their guard. In their eyes, it was already a good thing that they did not initiate an attack. Why would the enemy dare to take the initiative to find trouble with them? With such an arrogant attitude, the sudden appearance of more than 10,000 mercenaries caught the Jiaoji army in the city off guard. After that, the two sides engaged in a chaotic battle for more than 2 hours. In the end, when Chen Bo led the real mercenaries to appear, the battle became one-sided. The Jiaoji soldiers were defeated. In just the beginning of the battle, the Jiaoji mercenaries lost 2,000 men and injured 1,000. The Jiaoji soldiers suffered even more losses. The corpses and blood on the ground proved everything. You did well. There are always casualties in war. However, these deaths are valuable. Chen Bo was afraid that Hong Jin would be heartbroken over the loss. He walked over and patted Hong Jin's shoulder, encouraging him. "I am fine. Don't worry, Battalion Commander Chen. Next, we can charge to the 3rd Street in the west. There is a granary in the city there." Hong Jin shook his head and chuckled. Speaking of which, Chen Bo was overly worried. Just as he had said, how could there be no deaths in a war? Often, in a big war, even if the winning side lost thousands or tens of thousands of people, it was an extremely normal thing. Only the mercenaries would suffer a huge loss if they lost a few hundred men. Therefore, Hong Jin did not care about such a small loss. Moreover, these people had just joined him. They did not have any feelings for each other. If they died, they died. In any case, he could continue to recruit soldiers in the future. As long as he gained Yang Chendong's trust, he would not have to worry about the source of soldiers. Hong Jin did not have to worry about this. He became the king of Li Li. Originally, the 2 days he gave the officials was a little rushed. This caused chaos in some places. However, who would have thought that the mercenaries would take the initiative to attack? This made his so-called 2 days even more tense. He even felt that it was not enough. "Pass down my orders. Immediately send 20,000 men to suppress the mercenaries. We must suppress the mercenaries' attack." Li Li shouted to the generals in the palace. When he turned around and left the palace, he ordered the people in the palace to quickly leave the city with him. "Take what you can take, and don't take what you can't take. Just hide them. He firmly believed that there would be a day when he would return. 20,000 men were sent out. However, they had lost their fighting spirit. How could they be a match for the mercenaries who were desperately looking for people to fight? After a few small-scale chaos, thousands of corpses were left behind. The Jiaoji army in the city fought as they retreated. Most of them gathered around the west city gate. If they really wanted to cut off the Jiaoji army's retreat, it would be a bloody and bitter battle. For the sake of their only retreat, the Jiaoji army would not give up easily. In the end, both sides would suffer great losses. However, Chen Bo's goal was not to cut off the Jiaoji army's retreat. They wanted more food. Since everyone's goals were different, there were fewer conflicts. In the end, after 2 days, the Jiaoji royal family, the officials, and the nobles all left Haniai. Chen Bo and the others also managed to snatch 2 granaries of food as they wished, as well as the food stored by some of the larger families. The logistics department had already done the calculations. This amount of food was enough to feed an army of 300,000 for a year. With food, Yang Qindong's heart could be at ease. While praising Chen Bo for completing his mission, he also called Hong Jin over and allowed him to expand the Jiaoji mercenaries in the city. Of course, the military strength was still 30,000. Most of the nobles in Jiaoji had fled, but most of the commoners did not. Their ancestral property was here. If they really fled, they did not know where they could go or what they could do. As such, they were like criminals waiting to be judged, waiting in their own homes. At this moment, the 47,000 Jiaoji youths were put to use. Back when they were in Crimson City, they had already undergone systematic learning. While not all of them were elementary scholars, they were still able to read and communicate with others. After arriving at Beidai City, they were met by Yang Qindong a few times and had a few lectures. As such, they knew what to do next. Now that it was time to send them to work, under the protection of the Jiaoji mercenaries, the auxiliary mercenaries, and temporary auxiliary soldiers, they began to roam the streets. The tasks that these youths had to do were simple and even crude. They would explain the policies of the mercenaries to the commoners. They would tell them that as long as they lived like before, farming and doing business, no one would make things difficult for them. The mercenaries would even sell some of the food to them to ensure that they had enough to eat. Chapter 5:13. The policy was announced. Those who cooperated would naturally receive the basic respect of the mercenaries. However, those who did not cooperate would be in trouble. The educated youth would stand on the street and wave his hand, and the mercenaries or Jiaoji mercenaries would rush over to capture them. Then, they would casually label them or send them to reform through labor. Those who committed serious crimes would be killed on the street. Yang Qindong would not tolerate the foreign races as much as he did the Han people. Yang Qindong would even tolerate the ethnic minorities living in the Han area, such as the Miao people. However, he would not be courteous to the Jiaoji people, a fickle and petty country. It was either to admit defeat or to arrest him. There was no third option. Under the high-pressure policy, the law and order in Hanoi City returned to normal in just 5 days. When Yang Qindong walked on the streets, he saw the normal life of the citizens. The only difference was that the smell of blood on the streets had not dissipated. Moreover, he could often see the mercenaries patrolling the streets. Looking at the statistics sent by the Tiger's Man, more than 5,000 people had been killed in Hanoi City in 5 days, and more than 40,000 had been captured. Hanoi City, which originally had 300,000 citizens, was now left with only 250,000 people. It was a loss of 1/6 of its original population. Of course, the 5,000 people killed were not only the Jiaoji people who resisted. There were also some Jiaoji people who wanted to fish in troubled waters, and some Jiaoji mercenaries who wanted to take advantage of the situation to commit all kinds of crimes. Hong Jin had already been reprimanded by Yang Qindong for this matter. Regardless, the situation had temporarily stabilized, and the atmosphere in the city had changed. The next step was to send these people to Chu-yi City in batches, and then send them to Ryukyu Island by sea. That place was lacking in population. This time, when the 50,000 educated youth were transferred from there, Yu Qian, who was in charge of the overall situation there, was very unhappy. In the end, Yang Qindong said that there would be more than 100,000 people. Only then did he reluctantly agree. Yu Qian was such a person. He had a righteous heart, and he was not afraid of anyone. Even if it was Yang Qindong's order, he would still dare to refute it. Since they had agreed to send back 100,000 people, the 40,000 people they had captured earlier would become the first batch. There was still a gap of 60,000 people, and they would have to choose from the civilians of Hanoi City. Of course, such trivial matters would be handled by others. Yang Qindong only needed to arrange the orders. In 5 days, the situation in Hanoi City was stabilized. Especially with sufficient food, the atmosphere in the city was normal. However, it was a completely different story outside the city. Previously, when Li had retreated from Hanoi City, Yang Qindong had already guessed that the other party was preparing to besiege Hanoi City. However, he didn't know what the other party would do. However, 5 days later, he finally received news that Li had not only gathered 200,000 troops near Shiyu City, but he had also allied with the Lansang Kingdom, Laos in the future, sending 100,000 troops from Yingluan to Hanoi. With 300,000 troops outside, this was the feast that Li had prepared for Yang Qindong. Ha, this Li is really getting old. Does he think that this young master will play some kind of battle with him? He wants to surround me with these few people, Yang Qindong sneered as he looked at the report in Tiger's Mane's hand and threw it aside. Then, he said thoughtfully, the Lansang Kingdom has also intervened. That's good. Originally, I thought that just dealing with Jiaoji wouldn't be much of a challenge. Since they want to interfere, then I'll just deal with them as well. At this moment, Yang Qindong was showing great confidence, without a trace of nervousness or panic. Seeing him like this, Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei were also full of confidence. In their eyes, there was nothing in the world that could stop the young master and the young master. 5 days was enough for the news of Hanoi City to spread. In the southern Ming capital's Nanjing residence, Zhu Qizhen, who was in the imperial palace, received this news. In that instant, he was so shocked that he almost fell off his throne. Be careful, Your Majesty. Eunuch Chao Jixiang, who had been observing from the side, was also given a fright and hurriedly reached out to support him. Zhu Qizhen, who had been supported by his arm, was covered in cold sweat. He didn't seem to care about Chao Jixiang at all. Instead, he seemed to be asking a question, as if he was talking to himself. Great companion, is this true? Yang Qindong only has 10,000 soldiers, and he can take down the Jiaoji Kingdom's capital. There should be hundreds of thousands of Jiaoji soldiers there. Chao Jixiang didn't know how to answer this question, and this result was also out of his expectations. Like many others, he thought that Yang Qindong was overestimating himself by declaring war on Jiaoji. Even if he had the most advanced firearms in his possession, the lack of manpower was still a major drawback. Moreover, the environment, terrain, and climate there were all different from the Great Ming Dynasty. It would take a long time for them to adapt to the environment there. It was just like when the Great Ming had sent troops to Jiaoji. They had been quite aggressive, but because many of them couldn't adapt to the environment, they had lost a lot of soldiers, and they couldn't do much. With this as an example, the mercenaries wouldn't fare much better. Who knew that the mercenaries would be so ferocious and be able to kill their way into the Great Ming's capital in such a short period of time and even succeed? Even King Li, who was not to be trifled with, had no choice but to retreat. Moreover, according to the reports, this old king had been forced to ally with the Lansang Kingdom to defend against the Great Ming's forces. Only then had he been able to stand firm. The changes and developments of the situation had indeed exceeded everyone's expectations. This was why Zhu Qizhen was so shocked, but this was within reason. It took a while for Zhu Qizhen's expression to return to normal, but the fear in his heart did not lessen. Since Yang Qindong could force Jiaozhi to suffer defeat after defeat, what would happen if he fought with the southern Ming army? He didn't dare to think about it. Zhu Qizhen felt some regret. If he had known this would happen, he wouldn't have given Yang Qindong a chance to attack Jiaozhi. At that time, he had wanted to weaken the Great Ming's strength, but now, it seemed that he was strengthening the Great Ming's strength. After all, if an army wanted to develop, it was like a flower seedling wanting to grow. First, it had to find a suitable soil. Whether it was in the southern Ming or Bai Ming, there was no such soil for mercenaries to grow. With so many restrictions, it was easy to imagine how difficult it would be for an army to develop. However, once they went out, it would be different. The reports had clearly stated that the captured Chu-Yi and Beatty cities of Jiaozhi were being managed by mercenaries. This meant that they had a certain foundation. If they were allowed to develop, the consequences would be unimaginable. After all, just 10,000 mercenaries were able to force the Jiaozhi army to retreat. Once this army's numbers continued to increase, what would happen? Wouldn't that mean that one day, the Great Ming Empire wouldn't be a match for them and would be in great danger? When he thought about how this danger was caused by him, it would be strange if Zhu Qizhen's expression was good. This won't do. We can't let them develop any further. Pass down my decree. Have Lu Desheng immediately come to an agreement with Jiaozhi. At the same time, send a decree to Duke Zhongdan. Tell him that Jiaozhi has been on good terms with the southern Ming Empire for generations. Now, they have submitted to me and agreed to establish a new Jiaozhi province. This was Zhu Qizhen oppressing Yang Qindong with the general trend, making his painstaking efforts go down the drain. After saying all this, Zhu Qizhen asked Chao Jixiang, have the people sent to Jianing left? Chao Jixiang knew that Zhu Qizhen was concerned about Yang Qindong's fourth brother, Yang Yang. He immediately nodded and replied, reporting to your majesty, they have already set off. They should have arrived in Jianing by now. Zhu Qizhen didn't say anything immediately. Instead, he closed his eyes and thought for a moment. When Zhu Qizhen opened his eyes, a new idea had appeared. Great friend, immediately send a trusted aide to Jianing. Inform them that they must treat Duke Zhongdan's fourth brother well. At the same time, they must invite him to Nanjing. I want to give him a high position. Temporarily, he will be the Minister-Counselor of the Ministry of Works. The Minister-Counselor of the Ministry of Works was a secondary class, rank 5 official position. In comparison, the position in the Ministry of Works wasn't an important position and didn't have much power. It was more symbolic. Previously, he sent people to Jianing to capture Yang Qindong. Although he didn't say what crime he would commit, capturing Yang Qindong first was a form of intimidation. However, now that he suddenly gave Yang Qindong an official position, Chao Jixiang couldn't help but have another thought. Was the emperor a little too timid? Otherwise, why would he suddenly change his mind and give Yang Qindong an official position? Of course, this could also be seen as a way of showing goodwill or conciliation. However, this was only possible after the fall of the Jiaozhi nation. It seemed that the real reason was already on the verge of being revealed. However, no matter what thoughts he had, since this was the emperor's decree, Chao Jixiang had to obey. He immediately nodded and replied, yes, your majesty. Then, he turned around and went to do his work. After the decree was passed down, Lu De, who was originally arguing with the Jiaozhi envoy and wanted more benefits, immediately changed his attitude. He expressed that he could ignore King Li Li's impudence and disrespect, referring to old Li Li wanting to marry the third princess of the Ming dynasty. As long as they really submitted to the great Ming dynasty, paid tribute every year, called themselves Jiaozhi province, and sent troops to suppress the rebellion behind King Min and King Shiping, then the southern Ming dynasty could order Duke Zhongdan to withdraw his troops. Chapter 5:14. The Jiaozhi envoy had also received the news that the capital had fallen, and his heart was already in chaos. Now that Lu De was willing to take a step back, how could he not be grateful? He immediately expressed that Jiaozhi was willing to submit, and he only hoped that the great Ming Duke would quickly withdraw his troops. After all, if this continued, Jiaozhi would not be far from being destroyed. At that time, even if they withdrew their troops, it would not be King Li anymore. What was the difference between retreating and not retreating? Since the man had feelings for the woman, the agreement was quickly reached. Following this, the Jiaozhi envoy and the great Ming envoy left Nanjing together, heading straight for Jiaozhi. This was imperial power. In order to achieve their own selfish goals, they did not care about what the mercenaries had done, even if they were expanding the territory for the Han. 3 days later, the news that Yang Qindong had led the mercenaries to attack Jiaozhi finally reached Baiming's capital. Similarly, substitute sect master Zhu Qiyu was shocked to the core. During this period of time, Baiming had been peaceful and united, and they had been looking for a way to develop. The southern Ming dynasty was in chaos, and their minds were filled with lawsuits. They did not care about Baiming at all, and the Walla in the north was vigorously developing their businesses, so they had no intention of finding trouble with Baiming. With the outside world stable, Baiming had time to rest. Zhu Qiyu could be considered a wise ruler. With the outside world stable, he recruited and trained his troops, and the morale and numbers of his troops had been greatly improved. This was especially so after receiving the Type 81 automatic assault rifle from the mercenaries. He had spent a lot of effort researching it, and the production of firearms and cannons had been continuously pushed forward. Although there was still a long way to go before they could produce a finished product, they were indeed starting to see the light of day. For example, they had already produced some ordinary cannons, and they had also begun to see the light of day in the structure of the Type 81 automatic assault rifle. It could be said that as long as they were given 1 or 2 more years, they might really be able to produce a Type 81 automatic assault rifle. This was the wisdom of the Han. As long as they were willing to put in the effort, there was nothing that could not be done. Just like in the future, it only took China a few decades to catch up with the most developed countries in the world economically. Although there was still a certain gap, it was obvious that the gap was getting smaller and smaller. All aspects of the work were on the right track, and Zhu Qiyu's throne was becoming more and more stable. At this moment, his thoughts were a little wild. He wondered if there was a chance to unify the northern and southern Ming dynasty and recreate the glory of the great Ming dynasty. However, in order to achieve this goal, there were some problems that had to be solved. One of the problems that needed to be solved was the problem of Yang Qindong. On one point, Zhu Qiyu and Zhu Qizhen had the same idea. They were both somewhat afraid of the existence of Yang Qindong and the mercenaries behind him. Zhu Qiyu would never forget who was the one who forced Walla's army to retreat. He still remembered that at that time, when all the generals and soldiers under his command were helpless, it was Yang Qindong who took the initiative to stand up and easily made Walla retreat. At that time, Zhu Qiyu was still very grateful to Yang Qindong. If it was not for him, Baiming would have long ceased to exist. It was because of this that he was given the title of Duke of Loyalty. Now, the northern Ming dynasty was at peace, but Yang Qindong's power and influence were getting bigger and bigger. This made Zhu Qiyu very tired of it. She even became a little worried about personal gains and losses. It was because of this that when Jining and the others proposed to send people to assassinate Yang Qindong, Zhu Qiyu did not stop them. Instead, he tacitly agreed to all of this. However, he never expected that even though he had sent out quite a few people, he still could not find a suitable opportunity. It seemed like this Duke of Loyalty also knew that he had offended too many people. Normally, his security measures were very good, making it difficult for others to make a move. Those who sent out people could not find a suitable opportunity. Fortunately, Yang Qindong actually took the initiative to send troops to Jiaozhi. When he first received this news, Zhu Qiyu was overjoyed. He thought that this was because some people were overconfident. However, who would have thought that Jiaozhi, which the great Ming had no choice but to give up by force, would actually be forcefully opened up by Yang Qindong and his mercenaries? Not only that, they even occupied the capital. He originally thought that Yang Qindong was in great danger, and that he might even be defeated and killed without him making a move. Zhu Qiyu began to make preparations to take over the immortal abode and realm beyond heaven. This was especially true of the Yang family's bank. The amount of money in there was already enough to make Zhu Qiyu drool. This was something that couldn't be helped. Many merchants who had business dealings with the realm beyond heaven had to first deposit their money with the Yang family's bank. They could only do business with the bank's banknotes. This was not only the case for ordinary merchants of the Great Ming. Even the merchants of the Walla had to follow the same rules. This greatly increased the scale and influence of the Yang family's bank. The amount of gold and silver deposited there exceeded 40 million taels, enough to surpass the amount of money in Baiming's national treasury. Zhu Qiyu had always been watching the development of the Yang family's bank with the cold eye of a bystander. He was only waiting for the right opportunity to take over the bank. When news of Yang Qindong's mercenaries entering Jiaoji arrived, he believed that the opportunity had arrived. He had sent out quite a few people to keep an eye on the Yang family's bank, precisely to prevent them from suddenly transferring their money. However, not only had Yang Qindong not been defeated in Jiaoji, he had even won one battle after another. This made Zhu Qiyu's originally blazing heart feel as if it had been doused with cold water, instantly cooling down. Emperor Daizong was naturally drenched in cold sweat. If he really had been impatient and taken the Yang family's bank for himself, wouldn't he have offended Yang Qindong to the extreme? If that had happened, Baiming would have been in deep trouble. Putting aside whether or not Zhu Qiyu truly feared Yang Qindong, at the very least, he didn't want to fight with him right now. At the very least, before his new army was fully trained and firearms were manufactured, he needed to develop steadily. Pass down the decree. Have those keeping an eye on the Yang family's bank, the realm beyond heaven, the immortal abode, and the Yang family manor withdraw. Zhu Qiyu's expression was somewhat unsightly. His voice was somewhat weak as he spoke to the head eunuch Jining. Your Majesty, should we send them all back? Or should we leave half of our men to keep an eye on them? After all, the situation in Jiaoji is constantly changing. Moreover, news has come from the southern Ming Empire that Emperor Yingzong has already taken action to prevent the Duke of Loyalty from interfering in Jiaoji's war, Jining asked carefully. Of course, he was also voicing his own suggestions. When Zhu Qiyu thought of the news from the southern Ming Empire, he couldn't help but nod. Even so, there's no need to leave half of our men behind. Just leave a small portion to keep an eye on them. In any case, don't draw their ire for now. This subject understands. Jining nodded, then silently withdrew. In less than half a day, the people keeping an eye on Yang Qindong's businesses in the capital had all disappeared. It was as if they had never been there, blending into the sea of people and disappearing without a trace. 15 li south of the capital, in the Yang family manor, a carriage sped through the gates. Even though Yang Qindong had already left the Yang family manor for several months, the security here was still very high. Even this carriage bearing the Yang family's banner had to go through at least 3 security checks before it was allowed to enter the manor. As soon as it entered the Yang family manor, the sound of reading could be heard from afar. It was the sound coming from the Yang family academy. After spending enough money, Yang Qindong had hired a few scholars to teach here. Other than them, Yang Qindong's students like Wang Si had also stayed here to become teachers, continuing to spread the ideology of the Yang family. The carriage stopped in front of the inner courtyard of the Yang family manor. Then, a fat man walked out from within. Young Master Fu, second madam is waiting for you in the main hall of the front courtyard. Please follow me. The person who welcomed him was Yang Si, one of the main pillars that Yang Qindong had left behind. The person who was called Young Master Fu was naturally Yang Qindong's cousin, Yang Fu. He was already the person in charge of the Yang family's business. His body was much fatter than when he was in Jianing Prefecture, but at the same time, he had the aura of a superior. Thinking about it, even Walla merchants couldn't help but flatter him when they saw him. He was an existence that didn't dare to offend. In this kind of environment, he naturally had a powerful aura. However, this aura was only useful in the business world. Speaking of which, when he came to the Yang family manor, he restrained it as much as he could. At this moment, he was smiling kindly at Yang Si. Then I'll have to trouble brother Yang Si. Yang Fu was here to see second Madam Qiao Yin. This personal servant who had followed the sixth young master since Yang was taken in as a concubine and stayed in the Yang family manor, became Yang Qindong's representative. Every once in a while, a person in power like Yang Qindong would come to report on the situation at hand. Then, the second madam would send someone to gather the information and send it to Yang Qindong, who was far away in the southern Ming Empire. Young Master Fu, you're welcome. Yang Si also smiled and said. Then, the two of them walked into the manor, one in front of the other. Brother Yang Si, the sixth young master won the battle in Jiaoji. Even those ignorant people in the vicinity have lessened by a lot. Just thinking about it makes me happy. Yang Fu walked into the courtyard with his somewhat heavy body while expressing his good mood. Yes. Some people just don't learn from their mistakes. If the sixth young master was here, they wouldn't have the chance to show themselves. Now that they've left, they must have been frightened. Yang Si also chuckled. 2 hours ago, he had already received the news that the number of people watching them outside the manor and around the Yang family's businesses in the city had lessened significantly. This made Yang Si let out a long sigh of relief, and at the same time, felt the burden on his shoulders lighten. Chapter 5:15. All of this was the result of Yang Qindong's victories. Yang Fu thought that with these victories as a foundation, his business would be better and he would be able to earn more money. He could no longer hide the happiness on his face. All of these were the effects of Yang Qindong's arrival in the Jiaoji kingdom. At this moment, in Hanoi City, Yang Qindong had gathered a group of military officers for a meeting to discuss the upcoming battle tomorrow. It had been exactly 8 days since they entered Hanoi City. In these 8 days, the city had gone from chaos to normalcy. Of course, this was due to the suppression of iron and blood. At the same time, it was also due to Hong Jin and Ruan Chuncheng, the former subjects of the Jiaoji kingdom, who had played an important role. Needless to say, Hong Jin had already sold his life to Yang Qindong. Now, he had even become the general of the Jiaoji mercenary army. He had 30,000 men under him. Although the army was formed at the last minute and there was still room for improvement, 30,000 men was still enough to intimidate the commoners. As for Ruan Chuncheng, he was the one who took the initiative to step forward. After occupying Hanoi City, Yang Qindong sent someone to send Ruan Chuncheng over from Beidao City. The moment the Prime Minister of Jiaoji walked into the capital, he could smell the stench of blood in the air and the blood that had yet to be cleaned up. As the Prime Minister of a country, Ruan Chuncheng had a heart that empathized with the commoners. Seeing his subjects being slaughtered because of resistance, he could not bear to see them being slaughtered. He took the initiative to ask Yang Qindong that he was willing to work with the commoners of Jiaoji to make them more obedient. Yang Qindong was naturally satisfied with Ruan Chuncheng's initiative. He immediately put him and Hong Jin in charge of public security and the people's well-being. Needless to say, using foreigners to control foreigners was very effective. Many of the unsettled citizens of Jiaoji calmed down under the guidance of their countrymen, and the security in the city began to improve. In addition, a large number of adult males were recruited into the Jiaoji mercenary army, and a portion of them were separated and brought to Ryukyu Island via Beidai City and Chui City. As a result, the unstable aura in the city was suppressed. Naturally, there were still opposing forces. After all, there were more than 200,000 Jiaoji citizens in the city. However, the 47,000 cultured youths of Crimson City were not just for show. They roamed the streets and alleys every day, using their glib tongues to persuade the people of Jiaoji whenever they saw them. For ordinary people, this kind of lobbying was very effective. They valued their own lives more than anything else. As for who would rule over them, there were very few people who would risk their lives to resist under the general trend. It had to be said that slavery existed in any country and region. Now that the law and order in the city had been stabilized, the next thing to do was to fend off outsiders. Today, the military officers were called over to make a decision on the next step of the military plan. All the military camps above the company level and auxiliary battalion level were allowed to participate in today's military meeting. The meeting was held in the palace hall of Jiaoji. The hall was spacious enough that it was still somewhat empty even with dozens of officials present. Yang Qindong was naturally seated at the head of the table. On his left was Tiger's Mane, and on his right was Beta Persei. This made his identity stand out even more. In fact, this time, he was facing his own people. Logically speaking, Yang Qindong did not have to put on airs. However, as the Yang family's army grew stronger, the concept of hierarchy naturally became more and more rigid. Based on the idea of a combination of political and military orders, if an army wanted to develop, there could be many ideas, but in the end, there could only be one voice. Otherwise, such an army would sooner or later encounter a huge problem. Sitting at the head of the table, Yang Qindong was analyzing the current situation for the military officers who came to participate in the meeting. Jiaoji's capital has been taken down by us. I'm sure it must be shocking. As soon as this sentence was said, there was a burst of laughter from below. It was obvious that everyone was laughing with pride. Yang Qindong also laughed. In his opinion, since they had done something to be proud of, why couldn't they laugh with pride? Therefore, he accompanied everyone and laughed for a while. When he felt the laughter gradually die down, he put away his smile and said seriously, "But just taking down a capital is far from enough. This is only the first step in our journey to the outside world. If everyone is satisfied now, I have to say that there will be many things that can satisfy you in the future. But I wonder if everyone wants to maintain the current situation? Or do you want to make new contributions until one day, your names resound throughout the world and be admired and worshipped by future generations? Make new contributions." Almost everyone said in unison. It was obvious that everyone was not satisfied. Especially after the process of achieving victory was not difficult, they naturally wanted to make more contributions. It would be best if they could leave a heavy mark in the history books. Fame and fortune had always been what people pursued. Even professional soldiers were no exception. Alright, since that is the case, I'm sure everyone has rested enough. Let's discuss how to fight our way out tomorrow and make new contributions. Yang Qindong was waiting for everyone to say this. Since everyone's opinions were unified, he would not be polite. He stood up and walked to the sand table of Jiaoji's military terrain. Then, he pointed at the sand table with a wooden stick and said, "Scouts report that in the northwest of Hanoi, Shiyu City, a total of 250,000 Jiaoji soldiers are gathered there. Among them, there are the elite elephant soldiers and the black soldiers who just returned from Lang Sun. Their combat strength is estimated to be at level 2. With a wave of his right hand, he pointed at Yinglu City west of Hanoi and continued, "There are 100,000 reinforcements from the Lansang Kingdom stationed there. The general leading them is called La Ti. His ability is average. The quality of his troops is also average. Their combat strength is estimated to be at level 3. Su Yunsheng, you tell us about La Ti's personal information and the details of the Jiaoji army." After Yang Qindong gave a rough description, he threw the question to the young man standing at the side. Su Yunsheng, the platoon leader of the reconnaissance platoon, was equivalent to a scout general. Due to his outstanding performance, he started as a scout, then became a deputy squad leader, then a squad leader, then a deputy platoon leader, then a platoon leader. After the reconnaissance platoon expanded, he became the first company commander. He was directly under the command of the 2nd Regiment of the Cold Front. This time, he came to Hanoi from the rainforest of Lang Sun after combining all the reports of the scouts. After more than 20 days, he cooperated with Wu Sheng, the commander of the 1st Battalion of the Cold Front, to kill tens of thousands of Jiaoji soldiers in Lang Sun. Among them, Wang Gengwang's troops numbered around 15,000. Even Chen Heijin, one of the famous generals of Jiaoji, had killed around 8,000 Jiaoji soldiers. In fact, battalion commander Wu Sheng had only brought a little over 1,000 soldiers. 1,000 of them entangled the enemy's army of 60,000 and killed 23,000 in 20 days. Just this result alone was enough to make everyone speechless. It also allowed Wu Sheng to solidify his position as the battalion commander of the 1st Battalion. Once the cold front needed to expand, it would be logical for him to take another step forward. Didn't Su Yunsheng get promoted from platoon leader to company commander because of his cooperation and timely report? This time, when Yang Qindong directly called him out to introduce the situation, Su Yunsheng was very excited. Fortunately, he already knew the situation, so he didn't make any mistakes because of his excitement. Everyone, let me introduce the 100,000 soldiers of the Lansang Kingdom. Their leader is called La Ti, from the Liaoting tribe. The Lansang Kingdom was mainly made up of 3 factions. The strongest was the Liaoting tribe, followed by the Liaoting tribe, and lastly, the Liaoting tribe. This time, King Li had ceded Lu Rong, Xiwan, and Rinan prefectures in Jiaoji to request for the Lansang Kingdom to send reinforcements. The one who came was the general of the Liaoting tribe, La Ti. This person was in his early 30s, and his martial arts were not bad. He had also read a few military books, and could be considered a valiant general of the Lansang Kingdom. However, it was precisely because this person was brave and resourceful that he had big ambitions. He wanted to raise the status of the Liaoting tribe in the Lansang Kingdom. Sending reinforcements to Jiaoji this time was also his wish. He wanted to perform well and get on the good side of King Li. For this reason, even though they were nominally the Liaoting tribe of the Great Ming dynasty, they still sent reinforcements without the Great Ming Emperor's orders. Not only did they send out 100,000 soldiers, they also used the resources of the Liaoting tribe. Among them, there were 5,000 cavalrymen and 5,000 master archers. Speaking of which, the master archers of the Liaoting tribe were all proficient in using bows and arrows. Not only could they easily shoot arrows up to 100 meters away, they could also hit their targets. They were quite capable. Of course, a general like this who had always wanted something was also his weakness. If he did well, he could become a weak point that could be attacked. Back to the Jiaoji army. After General Chen Heijin's black soldiers received King Li's order to retreat to Shiyu City, the number of Jiaoji army soldiers there had reached 250,000. Just the elite soldiers alone numbered 100,000. Among them were 20,000 elephant soldiers, 25,000 black soldiers, 20,000 crown soldiers, and 35,000 king's guards. This was especially true for the king's guards. Their shield-bearers were equipped with iron shields forged from fine iron. In addition, they also had 10 iron carriages that could be moved at any time. Although they were too cumbersome and moved a little slowly, to an ordinary army, they could be considered as having a body of diamond and were difficult to break through. After Su Yunsheng finished speaking, he saluted Yang Qindong and took a step back. It was time to keep a low profile and do things in a low-key manner. Chapter 5:16. Following Su Yunsheng's detailed explanation of the enemy's strength, the officers below began to whisper to each other. For example, 2nd Battalion Commander Chen Bo and 3rd Battalion Commander Kong Chuanshin were exchanging opinions with their subordinates from time to time. Obviously, they were already considering how to fight. After allowing the officers to discuss for the time it took to brew a cup of tea, Yang Qindong put down the teacup in his hand and calmly sat down on the chair. How is it? Does anyone have any good ideas? In ancient times, when a general went to war, he would usually discuss with a few of his close subordinates before deciding on the battle plan. After gathering everyone together, he would immediately announce the battle plan. This was the fastest way to achieve results. Otherwise, if he really gathered all the Kiliarchs and Centurions together for a discussion, it would be difficult to achieve any results. Furthermore, the ancient army seemed to be used to obeying orders. Usually, whatever the higher-ups said, the subordinates would act accordingly. If they were really asked to come up with ideas or use their brains, most of them would be uncultured people. They wouldn't be able to come up with any good ideas and would only spoil the situation. In Yang Qindong's case, he really wanted to break this habit. What he wanted was for everyone to participate. He wanted everyone to get used to using their brains in battle. It didn't matter if they were right or wrong. After all, they still needed democratic centralism. As long as the commanders didn't make any mistakes, it would be fine. They were already used to Yang Qindong's style. When they were asked if they had any ideas, the officers began to express their opinions. Chief, I think we should pick on the weaker ones and attack the Liaoting tribe of the Lansang kingdom first. No, with our strength, how can we bully the weak and fear the strong? We should deal with the Jiaoji army first. Yes, as long as we scare the Jiaoji army, that Lati won't be a problem. He would probably run away with his tail between his legs. The third person's voice was quickly followed by a burst of laughter from the other officers. The atmosphere became much more lively. But in general, the difference in opinion was whether to attack the Jiaoji army or the Liaoting tribe first. After all, although the mercenaries had advanced firearms, there were too few of them. It was unrealistic for them to fight both of them at once. Yang Qindong looked like he was seriously listening to their opinions. After the time it took for 2 incense sticks to burn, most of the officers below had expressed their opinions, and the voices of discussion had quieted down. He cleared his throat and turned to look at Cold Front 2nd Battalion's Battalion Commander Chen Bo. Battalion Commander Chen, I didn't see you say anything earlier. What do you think? Chen Bo, whose name was called, stood up from his seat. His eyes were not focused. Obviously, he was still thinking about the problem. Chen Bo was called Confucian General by Yang Qindong. This was because he was different from the other officers in terms of height and strength. Although he was not tall, he had more of a scholarly air and less of a valiant aura. Perhaps this had something to do with his love of reading. Because he loved reading, he liked to think more when he encountered problems. He was always willing to ask more questions or make more hypotheses. Just like earlier, he was constantly making hypotheses until Yang Qindong called him to stand up. Then, his thoughts started to come together. 6th young master, if it were up to me, I would prefer to beat the Liaoting tribe into submission first. After all, it shouldn't be too difficult to deal with them. Otherwise, we won't be able to deal with the Jiaoji army with our full strength. Also, we won't be able to get used to having someone watching us from behind. Then do you have any ideas? Looking at Chen Bo, Yang Qindong had an intuition that he should have thought of a plan to retreat. As expected, Chen Bo quickly nodded his head and said, 6th young master, this is what I think. Since they took the initiative to become enemies with us mercenaries, it's not enough to just teach them a lesson. Instead, we should completely defeat them. It would be best if we could wipe them all out and let them remember this lesson. From then on, whenever we mention the name of mercenaries, they would feel their entire body tremble. Only this way can we warn the future generations and let them know what kind of attitude they should maintain when facing us again. After Chen Bo said these words, it gave Yang Qindong a feeling that he was planning something big. It was not difficult for him to be curious and said, go on. 6th young master, what do you think? Isn't the navy attacking Sunan County from Zhejiang County? I heard that the progress is very smooth. Then, can you let them make a stance? Let's make it look like they are marching towards the Lansang kingdom from the Changshan mountain range. We just need to make a big commotion. Presumably, if the commotion is enough, they will definitely return to their country for the sake of their own safety. At that time, we can attack them halfway and achieve twice the result with half the effort. Taking the initiative to walk in front of the sand table, Chen Bo explained his idea in detail. Then he looked at Yang Qindong with an expectant look. Yang Qindong was also interested in Chen Bo's idea. To be honest, it's only 100,000 Laotian soldiers. They don't really pose a threat to Yang Qindong. If he really needs to pacify the Jiaoji army, he can just lead the army to the west. It won't be difficult to kill the Laotian soldiers. So what he wants to do is to intercept the Laotian soldiers halfway and deal with them. But if he really does that, the most he can do is to chase them away. If he wants to hurt them, it will be a bit difficult. On the contrary, Chen Bo's plan was completely different. First, he would mobilize them, and then intercept them when they had no choice but to retreat. In this way, it was possible to achieve the possibility of seriously injuring the enemy, or even annihilating the enemy. Moreover, by waiting for the exhausted enemy to arrive, the price to pay would only be smaller. As for the need to mobilize the navy, that is even less of a problem. Didn't Chen Bo just say it? They just need to make a commotion, there is no need to really send out troops. Okay, I will leave this matter to the 2nd Battalion. How many troops do you need? Yang Qindong quickly made a decision. This is how a commander is, being indecisive will often lead to chaos. Moreover, even if this plan doesn't work, he won't lose anything. He will just treat it as a long-range training for the army. Seeing that Yang Qindong agreed, Chen Bo was also very excited. Previously, when the 3rd Battalion commander Kong Chuanxin took down the capital of Jiaoji, Hanoi, he was very envious. Although he also took down Beidai City, it was a defenseless city compared to Kong Chuanxin. He didn't even fire a few shots, the sense of accomplishment was too small. But if he can take down 100,000 Laotian soldiers, it will be completely different. That will be a real military merit. 6th Young Master, if possible, other than the 2nd Battalion, I would like to mobilize 2 auxiliary battalions, 5 temporary auxiliary battalions, and 10,000 Jiaoji mercenaries. After saying this, Chen Bo also purposely explained, I want to take down all 100,000 Laotian soldiers. If the number is too small, I am afraid that I can only defeat and cripple them, but not all of them. Approved. Yang Qindong nodded decisively. Chen Bo's request was not low, but it also proved his confidence. Just as he said, if they wanted to take down 100,000 Laotian soldiers, it would be impossible if the number was too small. Thank you, 6th Young Master. Don't worry, if I can't take down 100,000 Laotian soldiers this time, I will start from scratch. Seeing how much Yang Qindong trusted him, Chen Bo said emotionally. He was probably the first person other than Yang Qindong to lead 10,000 Laotian soldiers to battle, so it was normal for him to be emotional. With Chen Bo's promise, the other officers who wanted to fight for a chance all shut their mouths. This was especially true for 3rd Battalion Commander Kong Chuanxin. He didn't want to fall behind others. Since 2nd Battalion Commander Chen Bo could do this well, why couldn't he? Although he didn't quite understand the specific battle plan of the other party, as long as he had the idea, he could study the details later. However, all of this changed after hearing Chen Bo's promise. Compared to Chen Bo's courage and willingness to stake everything on a single throw, Kong Chuanxin was much less confident. With the plan to deal with the 100,000 Laotian soldiers, the following meeting was much simpler. Yang Qindong announced that other than leaving behind 2,000 Jiaoji mercenaries and 1 auxiliary camp to defend Hanoi City, the rest of the 20,000-plus troops would set out for Shiyu City the next morning. He wanted to make a show of an all-out attack, luring the 100,000 Laotian troops under Rithi so to send out their troops. After the meeting, Recon Company Commander Su Changsheng sent out scouts towards Rinan Prefecture, informing Nie Tong to send out a portion of his men to cross the Changshan Mountains and attack the Lan-Sang Kingdom. After resting for 8 days, the mercenaries left from the north gate of Hanoi City with renewed vigor the next morning. They headed straight for Shiyu City, which was less than 200 miles away. The commander was naturally Yang Qindong. Beside him was the 2nd Regiment commander of Lingfeng, Luo Pa. However, this regiment commander was a little pitiful, as he only had a 3rd battalion, a regiment commander, and a regiment commander left. Even so, they were still the main force. Following Yang Qindong towards Shiyu City were 7 auxiliary battalions and 7 temporary battalions, as well as 18,000 Jiaoji mercenaries. the 25,000-strong army marched out of the city. Soon, their whereabouts were known by the Jiaoji scouts stationed nearby. The news spread like wildfire across the land of Jiaoji. A war to defend and a war to wipe out a nation was about to begin. On the same night that Yang Qindong led the army out of the north gate, the west gate of Hanoi City opened from the inside. Chen Bo brought his 2nd Battalion, 2 auxiliary battalions, 5 temporary battalions, and 10,000 Jiaoji mercenaries led by General Hong Jin out of the city, disappearing into the darkness. In order to complete the mission better, Chen Bo requested for General Hong Jin to come over. After all, the 10,000 Jiaoji mercenaries had played a huge role in keeping the 100,000 Laotian soldiers in Jiaoji. If they did not have a good commander, how could they succeed? Chapter 5:17. Shiyu City. The news of the mercenary army leaving the city had already reached here. King Li, who had regained his power, called for an emergency meeting. He called all the officials before him to discuss the strategy of retreating the enemy. Around 25,000 people. They increased the number of troops again. After hearing the report of the number of enemy troops, Crown Prince Li Yuanlong was the first to lose his composure and asked this question. It was no wonder that he was so surprised. Previously, the news said that the mercenary army was only around 10,000. Now that there was an increase of nearly half, it was reasonable for him to be surprised. This was the disadvantage of having outdated information. Ever since they gave up on Hanoi City, there was no more news about it. Many of the spies that were left in the city were dug out. There were some who were lucky enough not to be discovered and were sent out of Hanoi City. They went to the seaside and went straight to Ryukyu Island. They became miserable spies that couldn't be helped no matter how much they cried. Without internal information, they naturally didn't know that Hong Jin had formed a Jiaoji mercenary army of 30,000 people. In fact, it wasn't just Crown Prince Li Yuanlong who was shocked. The other officials were also shocked. The 10,000 mercenary army was already a headache for them. They even lost the capital. Now that the mercenary army had doubled in strength, how were they going to deal with it? On the other hand, although King Lily was shocked, he didn't show it on his face. After all, he was the king of a country. If he panicked, then wouldn't the rest of the country be in chaos? What are you panicking for? Seeing the panic on the faces of the officials, even Crown Prince Li Yuanlong wasn't as calm as before. Li Li's face was dark as he spoke. When everyone's gazes turned to him, he calmly said, "How about this, immediately send someone to inform General Lati. Tell them to move closer to us. If possible, bite the tail of the mercenary army. When the time is right, we will launch a pincer attack. By the way, tell him to be careful and not to be targeted by others. The king is wise." When the officials heard that they were going to ally with General Lati, they all relaxed. That's right, didn't they have reinforcements? In total, there were 350,000 soldiers. Compared to the 20,000 mercenaries, they had a 20 times advantage in terms of numbers. Furthermore, they were on the defensive. It seemed that there was no possibility of them losing. Some of the civil and military officials felt much more at ease after hearing the king's words. However, there were still some people who were terrified. This included the crown prince, Li Yuanlong. In the past, he had been able to act calmly and unhurriedly because he had the Zhoushan County as his foundation. As long as the Zhoushan County was not in chaos, he would have an escape route and reinforcements. But now, even that place was occupied by the mercenaries. He had lost his foundation. A crown prince without a foundation would lack confidence in whatever he did. The news of the mercenaries suddenly leaving Hanoi City and heading straight for Shiyu City naturally reached the ears of General Lati of the Lan Sang Kingdom in a very short time. Since he had arrived in Jiaoji, Rithi was prepared to fight the mercenaries. Seeing that everything was happening as he had expected, he began to mobilize and gather his troops before the battle. The distance from Shiyu City to Yinglu City where Rithi was located was less than 400 li. Soon, the scouts sent by the king of Lili arrived. After receiving the signal from the king of Jiaoji, Rithi led 95,000 soldiers out of Yinglu City and rushed behind the mercenaries. He left 5,000 soldiers to guard Yinglu City. In addition, there were 2,000 Jiaoji soldiers in the city. There should not be any problems guarding the city. Rithi even hoped that someone would attack the city. That way, he could quickly return and launch a pincer attack from both the inside and outside of the city to teach the mercenaries a lesson. However, what he did not expect was that the mercenaries had no intention of attacking the city. Yang Qindong had said more than once that if you keep the people and lose the land, you would gain the people and the land. If you keep the land, you would lose the people and the land. According to Yang Qindong, the main goal was to eliminate the enemy's strength. As long as the main army of Jiaoji was eliminated, the cities could not be moved. Wouldn't that mean that the mercenaries could occupy the cities whenever they wanted? Rithi led the army out of the city. However, the marching speed was not very fast. It was only about 20 li a day. This way, they could better maintain the discipline of the troops. With the front and rear looking after each other, if any of the troops were attacked, they could ensure that they would rush to the rescue as quickly as possible. The 5,000 cavalrymen under his command were used as a rapid response force. Of course, the reason why they were so slow was because of the news from the front. The 20,000 mercenaries did not attack immediately after arriving at Shiyu City. Instead, they stopped 10 li outside of the city and looked like they were in a standoff. Although Rithi did not understand why the mercenaries did not attack immediately, he did not think too much about it. In his opinion, this was his chance. Once he could successfully move behind the mercenaries, it would be time for him to work with the Jiaoji army to launch a pincer attack. He didn't believe that with over 300,000 soldiers pressing down, and with the front and rear attacking together, the other side's 20,000 soldiers could do anything. It could be said that until now, neither King Lili nor General Rithi suspected that the mercenaries had split up. They did not know that the Jiaoji mercenaries alone accounted for 18,000 of the 20,000 mercenaries. At the same time, the commander of the 2nd Marine Regiment, Nie Tong, received the order and led 2 battalions of soldiers towards the Changshan mountain range. Although there were not many soldiers, in order to create enough momentum, each squad raised a sun and moon flag of the Great Ming dynasty. From afar, it looked like the flags were fluttering in the wind and the morale was high. The discovery of the mercenaries in the east of the Lansang Kingdom frightened the king of the Lansang Kingdom, Paisai. Paisai inherited his father's position and became the new king of Lansang Kingdom. Under his rule, the kingdom was considered stable. However, because the territory was too small, they could not find a good opportunity to expand. When the mercenaries suddenly appeared in Jiaoji, they took note of it. After all, Jiaoji was their neighbor and their territory was not small. It had always been one of the goals that the Lansang Kingdom wanted to expand. Originally, they wanted to wait for the Jiaoji army and the mercenaries to fight to the point where both sides were heavily injured before they made a move. However, they did not expect that the small mercenaries would be so powerful and win consecutive battles. In the end, the Jiaoji army even lost their kingdom. If the two sides were evenly matched, a third party might have a chance. However, when one side could only take a beating, there would not be a chance to take advantage of the situation. Just as King Paisai was having a headache about how the mercenaries were so strong, King Lili's messenger arrived. He even brought a letter from the king of Jiaoji asking for help. In the letter, King Lili first expressed his sincere greetings to King Paisai and then pointed out that the situation in Jiaoji was not going well. He requested that the Lansang Kingdom send troops to help out on account of the fact that they had been neighbors for generations. He also promised that after the war, he would give the 3 prefectures to the Lansang Kingdom. At the same time, he also said that the mercenaries were too strong. If they were not restrained, they would deal with the Lansang Kingdom the same way they dealt with the Jiaoji Kingdom today. This was the logic behind the saying, when the lips are cold, the teeth will die. King Lili's words made sense. In addition, the 3 prefectures could be given to the Lan Xang kingdom. This was a good thing for the development of the Lan Xang kingdom. Of course, the most important thing was that he did not have a clear understanding of the mercenaries' strength. A flintlock? This sounded very powerful. King Paisai, who had seen them before, started to look down on them. In his opinion, Jiaoji was the strength of a kingdom. It was impossible to conquer it with just 10,000 mercenaries. As time passed, they might even solve the problem themselves. If that was the case, the benefits of the 3 prefectures would be lost. Completely ignoring the word advanced in firearms, Paisai made a decision that he would regret for the rest of his life. He agreed to send 100,000 soldiers to support Jiaoji. Previously, the war happened within the borders of Jiaoji. No matter how intense the war was, King Paisai did not have any direct knowledge of it. Until he suddenly received news that the mercenaries had entered from the Long Mountain Range and were heading straight for the capital, Wanxiang City. Furthermore, there was news from the front lines that a border patrol of 500 people encountered the mercenaries. However, in just one encounter, they were defeated and left behind 300 corpses. All of this was Commander Nie Tong's idea. In order to make the Lan Xang kingdom afraid, not only did they have to advance with great fanfare, they also had to fight at least 2 battles. Although the navy could display their strength on the sea, this did not stop them from dealing with small groups of enemies on land. Just like this Lan Xang kingdom patrol team, they were unlucky enough to become the target of the 2 cold front battalions. Under the 95 styles rotating guns, how could 500 people be a match? The sudden appearance of the mercenaries caused the upper echelons of the Lan Xang kingdom to panic. Thinking that it was better to die than to die, King Paisai ordered General La Ti to lead the troops back to the kingdom. The Lan Xang kingdom's army of 95,000 people had advanced for 5 days. Initially, they were worried that the mercenaries would appear to intercept them. But now, they had advanced for 100 miles without encountering any enemies. General La Ti's alertness was constantly decreasing. He even began to consider whether he could speed up the march and attack the mercenaries with the Jiaoji army. Suddenly, the king's order arrived. Chapter 518. Seeing the letter in the messenger's hand, King Paisai's handwritten letter, King Ladi only hesitated for a moment before deciding to lead his troops back to the country. Even though helping Jiaoji win the war was a great achievement, if the Lan Xang kingdom was severely damaged, all of his achievements would become a stain on his reputation. Worse still, the old dragon tribe would take this opportunity to make things difficult for him. General Ladi, who didn't want to give anyone a chance to criticize him, quickly ordered his troops to turn around and retreat. He didn't even inform Jiaoji. It was clear how anxious he was. Compared to the 20 miles a day they traveled on the way to Yinglu City, the speed of the army was much faster. After all, no one knew what would happen to the Lan Xang kingdom if they delayed for another day. Perhaps the mercenaries had already clashed with the kingdom's army. While General Ladi was leading his troops back, in a place called the Wuha Forest, mines were being watered by the summer rain. In the dense forest of the Wuha Forest, the troops of the 2nd Battalion commander of the 2nd Cold Front Regiment, Chen Bo, were hidden. 3 days ago, he led more than 10,000 soldiers to this place. After choosing this place as the ambush location, they began digging the mines intensively. In a short period of time, countless deep holes were dug on both sides of the road to place a total of 3,000 mines. In less than half a day, the mines were successfully placed. Next, everyone returned to their respective positions. Along the Wulin River, the 10,000 soldiers hid themselves and began a long wait. They brought with them 10 days' worth of rations, which mainly consisted of instant noodles, ham sausages, and various canned food. Every soldier was either eating or sleeping. It was a leisurely scene. However, as the commander, Chen Bo found it difficult to truly sleep soundly. From time to time, he would look into the distance to see if the scouts had sent back any new information. "It's raining." In the dense forest, someone called out softly. Then, Chen Bo raised his head and looked at the sky. What he saw was a drizzle falling from the sky. Okay. Chen Bo couldn't help but clench his fists in excitement as he watched the drizzle fall on the trees and drip onto himself. Previously, he was still worried that he would leave some traces behind when he buried the mines and be discovered by others. But now that the rain was falling from the sky, everything was no longer a problem. This would be the best cover. In such weather, even the best scout would find it difficult to discover any problems. Not long after the light rain fell, a figure in the distance was rapidly approaching the dense forest. The person who came was the scout that was sent out. With his return, he also brought the latest news, which was that Lottie had returned with 100,000 troops. This damn weather. Riding on the horse and looking up at the sky, Ruthie couldn't help but curse. It was no wonder that Lottie was so angry. One could tell just by looking at the morale of the army. Originally, the nearly 100,000 soldiers were still holding their heads high and wanted to show off their might. But now, they were suddenly ordered to turn back. This was a very discouraging thing to begin with. But then, it started to drizzle. Although it wasn't very heavy, after a long time, the soldiers' clothes were soaked. The sticky feeling was very uncomfortable. The road also became muddy with the continuous drizzle. Every step they took was heavier than usual. This feeling made them feel even more uncomfortable. The morale of the entire army became much lower because of this. From afar, the army that was walking with their heads lowered would curse from time to time. They all looked like they were blaming the heavens and blaming others. However, even though the morale of the army was low, General Lottie couldn't do anything. Under such weather and such orders, even if he was a great orator, he wouldn't be able to raise the morale of the army at this moment. He just hoped that they could quickly reach Yinglu City, enter the city, change into dry clothes, eat hot food, and have a good sleep. Perhaps they would feel much better after that. All troops, speed up and try to enter the city to rest at night. Thinking that they were less than 40 miles away from Yinglu City, Lottie made up his mind and gritted his teeth as he spoke to his subordinates. Soon, the order was passed down. Although they hadn't had a good rest since the beginning of the return journey, the soldiers didn't complain too much when they thought about how they could have a good sleep after entering the city. Instead, they sped up silently. At this moment, no one thought about whether they would encounter an ambush. After all, they didn't see a single enemy on the way here. Now that they were about to return to the city, they were only 40 miles away from Yinglu City. In addition, the weather was bad and the sky was gradually darkening. Who would attack them at this time? Just like how it was very strenuous for them to walk, wouldn't it be the same for the enemy who wanted to attack them? It was precisely because of this misconception that the nearly 100,000 troops didn't have the slightest awareness of being on guard. On the contrary, because of the rain, the distance between the front, middle, and rear of the army was increasing. The sky slowly darkened. Perhaps it was because of the rain, but the sky was much darker than usual. It also made people feel very vexed. However, all of this didn't affect the mercenaries much. They were originally hiding in the rainforest, and the trees above them had blocked much of the wind and rain for them. In addition, they had been sleeping the entire day apart from eating, so everyone was in good spirits. At this moment, this group of elite soldiers was staring at the approaching Lan Xang army. Even though the front of their army had already walked past them, not a single soldier had the intention to charge out and fight. Even the 10,000 Jiaoji mercenaries didn't dare to make a single sound under the strict orders of General Hong Jin. It was as if they were afraid of causing a commotion and angering the mercenaries who killed without batting an eyelid. Not to mention, before the battle, the mercenary battalion commander Chen Bo had said that as long as everyone followed the rules, after the battle was over, all the soldiers who participated in the battle would be rewarded with at least 20 taels of silver, regardless of whether they had contributed or not. 20 taels of silver was equivalent to the annual income of an ordinary family in Jiaoji. With such a reward in front of them, everyone was naturally as obedient as they could be. Naturally, only rich mercenaries would be able to casually pay out 200,000 taels of silver without feeling the slightest bit of heartache. The darkness continued. Half of the Lan Xang army had already passed through the Wuhe forest, including the 5,000 cavalrymen and 5,000 archers. They were the main force and soul of this army of close to 100,000 men. Everyone, get ready. Through the night vision binoculars in his hands, he could clearly see the front of the army. He saw that the 5,000 cavalrymen were about to walk into a muddy area. In reality, there was a deep trench there. It was the best weapon to use against cavalrymen. As the commander, Chen Bo raised his right hand high into the air. Although the sky was a little dark, the raised right hand was still seen by many people. Their breathing became tense at this moment. Then, they focused their attention and waited for the hand to fall, then they would launch a fierce attack. The so-called attack was just shooting from a distance. According to Battalion Commander Chen Bo's plan, they could not fight the enemy head-on in this battle. They only needed to shoot from a short distance to cause chaos in the enemy army. Then, they would step on landmines to increase the chaos. As long as the enemy's morale was completely suppressed, then it would be time for them to clean up the mess. General Lati, who was unaware of all this, was still riding on his horse and moving forward. As a general, he arrogantly walked at the front. However, he did not know that his actions, which seemed like he was leading by example, was actually a catalyst to the death of nearly 100,000 soldiers. After all, if he, the main general, did not get into trouble immediately, the morale of the soldiers would not have fallen to the lowest point in such a short period of time. Bang! The trench, which was nearly 6 meters deep and 8 meters wide, collapsed. Before the cavalrymen in the first row could figure out what was going on, they fell one by one into the trench like dumplings. Next was the second row. General Lati was in this row. He only felt that the cavalryman in front of him had suddenly disappeared. Then, his body tilted and fell into the trench with a plop. Then, it was the third row, the fourth row. Fortunately, the trench had a limited capacity. Otherwise, at least hundreds of cavalrymen would have fallen into the trench and lost their ability to fight. However, even if only a few hundred people fell into the trench, the consequences were considerable. This was because their commanding general and several captains beside him had fallen into the trench together. At this moment, they were still pressed down by the cavalrymen and horses that fell into the trench. It was impossible for them to move in a short period of time. Just as this chaos was about to break out, a dazzling light suddenly shot up into the sky. A very bright red signal flare streaked across the dark night sky. At this moment, the horn that signaled the beginning of the battle had been blown. Tut tut tut, bam bam bam, bam bam bam, gunshots rang out in all directions. Sparks from the muzzles suddenly appeared in all directions, dealing a fatal blow to the soldiers of the Lansang kingdom who were in a hurry to move forward. No one would have thought that there would be enemies here. No one would have thought that they would be ambushed here. No one would have thought that the attack would be so sudden and fierce. Originally, the Wuhe forest was on both sides of the road. The distance in a straight line was only about 500 meters. When all kinds of bullets flew over, and when people suddenly fell to the ground in the rainy night, the army was in chaos. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.